When a single father receives a late-night message from his powerful female boss saying, "Come to my room, don't knock," he knows his entire life could change in the next 60 seconds. This is a story about courage, integrity, and the impossible choices we face when everything is on the line. If you want to see how one man's decision in a hotel corridor changed two lives forever, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The fluorescent lights in the Meridian Tower's 15th floor corridor hummed with a monotonous drone that Ethan Cole had heard 1,000 times before. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and he should have been home 2 hours ago. Should have been reading Goodnight Moon to his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. Should have been microwaving leftovers and pretending that boxed macaroni was a gourmet meal. Should have been anywhere but here, standing outside room 1512 with his phone clutched in one sweaty palm and his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The message glowed on his screen, 3 sentences that had turned his evening upside down. "Come to my room, 1512. Don't knock." It was from Clara Vaughn, Chief Operating Officer, his boss's boss's boss. A woman he'd spoken to exactly 4 times in 3 years, 3 of them in elevators, one at a company-wide meeting where she'd walked past his seat without glancing down. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath people take before jumping into cold water. His reflection stared back at him from the polished metal door plate. 34 years old, but looking older, brown hair that needed cutting, a cheap tie he'd worn 3 times this week already, and eyes that carried the particular exhaustion of a man who'd been running on empty for so long he'd forgotten what full felt like. He raised his hand, lowered it, raised it again. "Don't knock." The instruction bothered him almost as much as the summons itself. There was something wrong about entering a hotel room without knocking, something that violated every social contract he understood. But Clara Vaughn didn't make requests. She issued directives. And people who ignored Clara Vaughn's directives didn't stay employed at Meridian Solutions for long. Ethan thought about Sophie, curled up on Mrs. Patterson's couch 3 blocks away, probably asleep by now with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Mrs. Patterson charged $20 for every hour past 9 o'clock. He was already into overtime. This unscheduled detour was going to cost him, and not just in babysitting fees. Everything cost him these days. He pressed down on the handle. The door was unlocked. The room beyond was dark, except for a single lamp beside the window, casting long shadows across minimalist furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable in equal measure. Corporate hotel aesthetic, all sharp angles and muted grays, the kind of space designed for people who lived out of suitcases and measured their lives in quarterly reports. Clara Vaughn stood with her back to him, silhouetted against the window that overlooked the city skyline. She hadn't turned around, hadn't acknowledged his entrance, just stood there, perfectly still, her posture radiating the same controlled intensity she brought to every board meeting and budget review. "Close the door," she said. Ethan obeyed, and the soft click of the latch felt louder than it should have. Final, somehow, like sealing himself into a tomb or a trap. "Ms. Vaughn, do you know why you're here?" Her voice was steady, professional, giving nothing away. She still hadn't turned around. "No, ma'am." "Guess." The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Had he screwed up the server migration last week? Missed a critical security patch? Said something inappropriate in an email that IT had flagged? "I honestly don't know," he admitted. Clara turned then, and Ethan saw her face properly for the first time. She was 42, according to the company directory, with sharp cheekbones and darker hair pulled back in a style that was both severe and elegant. She wore a white blouse and black slacks, business attire minus the jacket, and her expression was unreadable. But her eyes were different than he remembered from those brief elevator encounters. There was something in them now that he'd never seen before. Fear. Not panic, not hysteria, but the cold, calculating fear of someone who'd just realized they were standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground was starting to crumble. "Sit," she said, gesturing to one of the room's 2 chairs. Ethan sat. Clara remained standing, which meant he had to crane his neck to look at her. The power dynamic was deliberate. She'd orchestrated thousands of meetings, knew exactly how to position herself for maximum psychological advantage. "How long have you worked at Meridian?" she asked. 3 years, 2 months. "And in that time, have you ever asked me for anything? A promotion, a favor, a recommendation?" Ethan blinked. "No, ma'am." "Have you ever tried to get my attention, sent me emails, positioned yourself to be noticed?" "No." "Have you ever lied on a timesheet, falsified an expense report, or taken credit for someone else's work?" "Of course not." Clara nodded slowly, as if his answers confirmed something she already knew. She walked to the desk, picked up a manila folder, and held it without opening it. "I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Cole, and I need you to understand that what happens in the next 5 minutes will determine both of our futures." She paused, weighing her next words with visible care. "I am being set up to take the fall for financial fraud I didn't commit, and the man who's orchestrating it is planning to destroy me before I can expose him." Ethan's throat went dry. This wasn't a performance review. This wasn't about server migrations or security patches. This was something else entirely, something that existed in a world of corporate politics and executive maneuvering that he'd always been grateful to avoid. "I don't understand," he managed. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I need a witness. Someone credible, honest, and completely untainted by executive politics." Clara set the folder down on the desk between them. "Someone who has no reason to lie for me and no history of seeking my favor. Someone whose testimony can't be dismissed as the statement of a loyal subordinate or a bought conspirator." "A witness to what?" "To the truth." She opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, bank statements, emails, a paper trail that meant nothing to Ethan's untrained eye, but clearly meant everything to her. "Richard Hernandez," Clara said. "Our CFO. Do you know him?" "I've seen him. Never spoken to him." "Good. That's important." She pulled out one of the spreadsheets, ran her finger down a column of numbers. "For the past 18 months, Richard has been systematically embezzling money from the company through a series of fake vendor accounts. Small amounts at first, 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Amounts that could be explained away as accounting errors or legitimate expenses if anyone questioned them. But over time it added up. We're talking about $630,000. Ethan whistled low. That's enough to destroy careers, enough to trigger federal investigations, enough to send someone to prison. Clara's jaw tightened. 3 weeks ago, I stumbled onto evidence of the scheme during a routine audit. I started digging, being careful, documenting everything. I thought I was being subtle. I was wrong. She pulled out a printed email, dated 2 days ago. Ethan saw his own name in the subject line and felt his stomach drop. What is that? This, Clara said quietly, is Richard's insurance policy. He discovered I was investigating him, so he created a counter-narrative. According to this email, which he's prepared to send to the entire board, I've been embezzling money with the help of a low-level IT technician named Ethan Cole. The room seemed to tilt. But I would never. I know, so do you. But Richard has manufactured evidence suggesting otherwise. Fake emails between us? Doctored financial records showing payments to an account in your name. It's all fabricated, but it's convincing enough to create reasonable doubt. Convincing enough to muddy the waters while he destroys the real evidence against himself. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the carpet. This is insane. Why would anyone believe I could access company finances? I'm in IT infrastructure. I reboot servers and troubleshoot network issues. Which makes you perfect. Richard's narrative is that you used your technical access to help me hide the transfers. That I recruited you, promised you a cut, and used you as my accomplice. Clara's voice remained calm, clinical, but Ethan could hear the strain underneath. It's elegant, really. It discredits both of us simultaneously and gives him time to cover his tracks. So go to the board now. Show them your evidence before he can. My evidence isn't complete yet. I'm missing the final piece. A digital signature that would prove Richard personally authorized the fraudulent transfers. Without it, it's my word against his. And Richard has been with this company for 12 years. He has allies, relationships, leverage. I've been here 4 years, and I've spent most of that time making tough decisions that powerful people resented. She met Ethan's eyes. In a credibility fight, I lose. Ethan paced to the window, stared out at the glittering cityscape below. Somewhere down there, Sophie was sleeping. Mrs. Patterson was probably watching her late-night crime dramas, the volume turned down low. His whole small, fragile life was continuing without him, unaware that it was about to be detonated. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I need you to testify. When I finally have the complete evidence, and I will have it within 72 hours, there's going to be an emergency board meeting. Richard will try to preempt it by releasing his fabricated accusations against us. But if you're willing to stand up in that meeting and tell the truth about your role, which is to say, no role at all, it will undermine his entire narrative." "You're asking me to put a target on my back?" "Yes." "To risk my job?" "Yes." "To go up against the CFO of a multi-million-dollar company?" "Yes." Clara's voice softened slightly. "I'm asking you to do something that could cost you everything. I understand that. I also understand that you're a single father with a young daughter and that you can't afford to lose your income or your health insurance or your stability. I understand that this is monumentally unfair." Ethan turned back to face her. "Then why ask? Because you're the only person in this entire company that I trust to tell the truth without calculating the political consequences first. Because in 3 years, you've never once tried to leverage our positions for personal gain. Because when I look at your employee file, I see someone who shows up, does the work, and goes home to take care of his family. No ambition to climb the corporate ladder. No schemes or angles." She paused. "Because I think you're the kind of person who still believes that doing the right thing matters." It was a hell of a speech. Clara Vaughn hadn't risen to COO by accident. She knew how to read people, how to find the pressure points and the principles, how to frame a request so that refusal felt like betrayal of your own values. But she wasn't wrong. Ethan thought about the man his daughter believed him to be. The man who'd promised her that good people won in the end, that honesty was always the best policy, that standing up for what's right was what heroes did. He'd said all of that in the abstract, in the safe space of bedtime stories and moral lessons about sharing toys and telling the truth about broken vases. He'd never expected to have to prove it when everything was on the line. "If I say no?" he asked quietly. "Then I fight this battle alone, and probably lose. Richard's accusations against you will still surface. He'll use them whether you cooperate with me or not. But without your testimony, I won't be able to definitively disprove them. You'll be dragged through the mud either way, but at least if you say no, you can claim ignorance. Say you have no idea what any of this is about." Clara's expression was carefully neutral. "I won't judge you for choosing to protect yourself and your daughter. That's not cowardice, that's survival." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You're good. That's reverse psychology." "It's not. It's respect." Clara closed the folder. "I brought you here because I needed to know if there was one person in this company I could trust to do the right thing. Now I have my answer, whatever you decide." She meant it. Ethan could see that clearly. There was no manipulation in her eyes now, no calculated pressure, just honest acknowledgement that she was asking him to make a sacrifice she had no right to demand. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "You have until tomorrow night. After that, the timeline accelerates, and I'll need to proceed with or without you." Ethan nodded slowly. His mind was spinning, trying to process everything, trying to calculate odds and outcomes and consequences. But underneath all of that was something simpler and more painful. The knowledge that he'd already made his decision the moment Claire had called him the kind of person who believed doing the right thing mattered. Because she was right. And because Sophie was watching him, even when she wasn't in the room. Especially when she wasn't in the room. Every choice he made was a lesson about what kind of world she'd grow up in and what kind of people she could trust. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said, "and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. Did you do it? Any of it? Even a fraction of what he's accusing you of?" Clara held his gaze. "No. I've made hard decisions. I've fired people who deserved second chances because the numbers demanded it. I've cut budgets and eliminated programs and prioritized profit over compassion more times than I can count. But I've never stolen. I've never lied about finances, and I've never tried to frame an innocent person for my crimes." She paused. "You don't have to believe me, but that's the truth." Ethan studied her face, looking for the micro-expressions that might betray deception. He'd learned to read people during his marriage, had gotten good at spotting the small tells that preceded his ex-wife's lies about where she'd been and who she'd been with. It was a skill he'd never wanted, but had proven useful more often than he'd like. He saw nothing in Claire's face but exhaustion and determination. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you believe me, or okay, you'll testify?" "Both, I think." He ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the decision settling onto his shoulders. "I need to sleep on it. Make sure I'm thinking clearly. But my gut says you're telling the truth, and Richard isn't." Something like relief flickered across Claire's features, though she controlled it quickly. "Thank you. For listening, at least. Can I see the evidence? The real evidence against Richard?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. She spent the next 30 minutes walking him through the paper trail, showing him the fake vendor accounts, the suspicious timing of payments, the patterns that emerged when you looked at all the data together. Ethan didn't understand all of it. Corporate finance wasn't his world, but he understood enough. Someone had been moving money around with great care and greater greed, and the digital fingerprints pointed toward Richard Hernandez. "The piece I'm missing," Clara explained, "is access to Richard's personal laptop. There's a file on there. I know because I saw it briefly when he was presenting in a meeting and minimized the wrong window. It's labeled Vendor Reconciliation, which sounds boring and official, but I saw enough of the spreadsheet to know it's the master document, the one that ties everything together and carries his digital signature." "Can't you just ask IT to pull it from his machine?" "Not without tipping him off. The moment I make an official request, he'll know I'm onto him and he'll destroy the file." Clara's jaw tightened. "I need to access it without his knowledge, which means I need to either get physical access to his laptop or find a way to remotely extract the file without leaving traces." Ethan's mind shifted into problem-solving mode despite himself. "If you can get me 30 seconds alone with his laptop while it's unlocked, I can clone the hard drive to an external device. He'd never know." Clara raised an eyebrow. "I thought you just rebooted servers." "I also do data recovery and occasionally help people retrieve files they've accidentally deleted." He shrugged. "You pick up skills. Could you teach me how to do it?" "It's not complicated, but you need the right equipment and you need to move fast, less than a minute from insertion to extraction." Ethan thought for a moment. "When does Richard usually leave his laptop unattended?" "Never. He's paranoid about security." Clara frowned. "The only time I've ever seen him away from it during work hours is when he's in the executive bathroom. And even then, he takes his phone." "Does he lock the screen when he walks away?" "Not always. Sometimes he just minimizes windows." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then that's your window, literally. You need to create a situation where he steps away for 60 seconds and forgets to lock his screen." "How?" "I don't know. You're the executive. I'm sure you can think of something." He glanced at his watch and felt his heart sink. 10:43 p.m. Mrs. Patterson was going to murder him. "I really need to get home." Clara straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Of course. I've kept you too long already." She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "Mr. Cole, Ethan, I want you to know that I understand what I'm asking. If you decide tomorrow that you can't help me, I won't hold it against you, and I'll do everything in my power to keep Richard's false accusations from touching you." "Will you win if I don't help?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Probably not, but I'll go down fighting." Ethan believed her. Clara Vaughn wasn't someone who surrendered easily. She'd claw and bite and use every weapon in her considerable arsenal right up until the moment they escorted her out of the building. But she'd still lose. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. Clara opened the door. The bright corridor lights flooded in, harsh and revealing after the dim intimacy of the hotel room. Ethan stepped out, blinking, feeling like he'd just surfaced from deep water. "Ethan?" He turned back. "Whatever you decide," Clara said quietly. "Thank you for being someone I could ask." The door closed before he could respond. Ethan drove home through empty streets, his mind churning. The city looked different at night, sharper somehow, all hard edges and deep shadows. He passed the 24-hour convenience store where he bought milk when they ran out, the park where he took Sophie on Sunday afternoons, the library where they spent Saturday mornings in the children's section, all the small landmarks of his small life. He parked in front of Mrs. Patterson's house and saw the living room lights still on. She answered the door in her bathrobe, looking tired but not angry. "Sorry," Ethan said immediately. "Work emergency. I'll pay the overtime." "Sophie's asleep on the couch. Went down around 9:30. Mrs. Patterson stepped aside to let him enter. "Everything all right? You look stressed." "Just the usual corporate chaos." The lie came easily, smoothly. He'd gotten good at lying over the years, at pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, at hiding stress and worry behind a smile because that's what parents did. "Thanks for watching her so late." "Any time, honey. You know that." Ethan found Sophie exactly where Mrs. Patterson had said, curled up under a crocheted blanket with Mr. Floppy clutched to her chest. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, was spread across the cushion, and her mouth was slightly open in that vulnerable way that always made Ethan's chest ache. She was everything. His whole world reduced to 4 feet of fierce personality and boundless trust. He scooped her up carefully, trying not to wake her. She stirred, mumbled something that might have been daddy, and then settled against his shoulder with a soft sigh. "I've got you," he whispered, "always." Mrs. Patterson held the door while he carried Sophie out to the car. He strapped her into her booster seat, drove the 3 blocks home, and carried her up the stairs to their apartment. The building was quiet, most of the other tenants already asleep. Ethan's apartment was on the 2nd floor, 1 bedroom that Sophie used, 1 converted dining area where Ethan slept on a pull-out couch, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, and a bathroom with perpetually dripping faucet he kept meaning to fix. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. He tucked Sophie into bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and placed Mr. Floppy in the crook of her arm. She didn't wake. Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep, feeling the weight of Clara's request pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. If he testified, he could lose everything: his job, his income, his ability to provide for his daughter. If he didn't, he'd be teaching Sophie that the right thing to do was whatever kept you safe. That truth mattered less than security. That integrity was a luxury people like them couldn't afford. Neither option was acceptable. Ethan retreated to the living room, pulled out his laptop, and did what he always did when faced with impossible decisions. He researched. He looked up everything he could find about Clara Vaughn, her career trajectory, her reputation, any hint of scandal or controversy. He found articles praising her business acumen, a few interviews where she discussed leadership philosophy, and exactly 0 red flags suggesting she was capable of embezzlement. Then he researched Richard Hernandez. The CFO's public profile was similarly clean, impressive credentials, steady climb through the corporate ranks, respected in his field. But Ethan noticed something interesting. 3 people who'd worked under Richard in previous companies had left those jobs abruptly. No explanations, just sudden departures right around the time of financial audits. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was a pattern. At 2:17 a.m., Ethan finally closed his laptop and stared at the ceiling of his living room, listening to the sounds of the building settling and the distant hum of traffic. He thought about his father, who'd worked construction for 40 years and had come home every night exhausted, but honest. Who'd told Ethan that a man's word was worth more than any paycheck. His father had died 5 years ago, never knowing that his son would one day face a choice between security and integrity. Ethan wondered what advice he'd give. He already knew the answer. At 6 a.m., Sophie's alarm went off, a cheerful jingle that sounded criminal at that hour. Ethan heard her stumbling toward the bathroom, heard the water running, heard her singing to herself in the slightly off-key way that made his heart swell. He got up, started breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast, orange juice in her favorite cup with the unicorns on it. By the time Sophie emerged, hair wild, pajamas wrinkled, the food was waiting. "Morning, Munchkin." "Morning, Daddy." She climbed into her chair, looked at the eggs suspiciously. "Can I have chocolate cereal instead?" "Eggs are brain food. You've got spelling tests today." Sophie sighed dramatically, but picked up her fork. "Mrs. Martinez says spelling is important for everything." Mrs. Martinez is a smart lady. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Ethan watched his daughter, memorizing this moment, the way morning light caught her hair, the smudge of egg on her chin, the complete trust in her eyes when she looked at him. Daddy? You okay? He blinked. Yeah, sweetheart. Why? You look sad. Just tired. Didn't sleep much. Sophie considered this, her face serious in the way only 6-year-olds could manage. Is it because of work? Sort of. Is someone being mean to you? No, nothing like that. He reached across the table, squeezed her small hand. Just grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. Okay. She went back to her eggs, apparently satisfied. Then, after a moment, Daddy? If someone was being mean, you'd tell them to stop, right? Like you tell me to do. Ethan's throat tightened. Yeah, baby, I would. Good, because you always say we should stand up for what's right. I do say that. So you should do it too. Out of the mouths of babes. Ethan drove Sophie to school, walked her to the classroom door, and watched her disappear into the chaos of first graders with their backpacks and their boundless energy. Then he sat in his car in the parking lot and pulled out his phone. He typed a message to Clara. I'll do it. Tell me what you need. Her response came 30 seconds later. Thank you. Are you sure? No. But I'm doing it anyway. That's the definition of courage. Ethan didn't feel courageous. He felt terrified, but he also felt something else, a strange sense of clarity, like he'd been walking through fog for years and had finally found solid ground. He drove to work, parked in his usual spot in the back of the lot, and rode the elevator up to the 15th floor where the IT department lived in a warren of cubicles and humming servers. His coworker, Marcus, was already at his desk, 3 monitors glowing with cascading code. You look like hell, Marcus observed. Didn't sleep much. New dating app keeping you up? Marcus grinned. I keep telling you, man, you need to get out there. Sophie needs a mom. Sophie's got me. That's enough. If you say so. Marcus turned back to his screens. Hey, did you see the email from Hernandez? He wants a full security audit of executive systems by end of week. Ethan's instincts prickled. That's unusual. Right? CFO doesn't usually care about IT security unless something's wrong. Marcus shrugged. Probably just covering his ass for the quarterly board meeting. Or covering his tracks, Ethan thought. Getting ahead of any potential investigation by appearing proactive about security. His phone buzzed. Another message from Clara. Can you meet tonight? Same place, 9 p.m. I have a plan. Ethan stared at the message, feeling the last chance to back out slipping away. Once he walked into that hotel room again, he was committed. There'd be no plausible deniability, no safe retreat. He typed, I'll be there. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Ethan troubleshot network issues, rebooted servers, answered tickets about password resets and printer malfunctions. Normal work, the kind of thing he could do on autopilot while his mind spun through scenarios and consequences. At lunch, he saw Richard Hernandez in the cafeteria, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, laughing with some of the other executives. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who had everything under control. Ethan wondered if that would change soon. At 5 p.m., he left the office, picked up Sophie from after-school care, and took her to the park like he always did on Thursdays. They played on the swings, chased each other around the jungle gym, and ate ice cream from the truck that parked near the basketball courts. Daddy? Sophie asked through a mouthful of chocolate chip. Do you like your job? Most days. Why? Emma's dad quit his job because his boss was mean. He's looking for a new one. That's hard. Yeah. Sophie swung her legs, watching the other kids play. If your boss was mean, would you quit? Ethan thought about Clara Vaughn standing in that hotel room with fear in her eyes. Thought about Richard Hernandez, probably sitting in his office right now, confident that his lies would protect him. If my boss was doing something wrong, he said carefully, I'd try to stop them, even if it was hard. Because that's what heroes do? Because that's what anyone should do. Sophie seemed to accept this. She finished her ice cream, then demanded to be pushed on the swings for another 10 minutes before Ethan could coax her toward home. At 8:30 p.m., Mrs. Patterson arrived to babysit again. She gave Ethan a knowing look but didn't ask questions. He kissed Sophie goodnight, promised to be home earlier this time, and drove back toward Meridian Tower. The hotel corridor was just as empty as it had been the night before. Ethan stood outside room 1512, remembering the choice he'd made, the line he'd decided to cross. He knocked this time. Clara opened the door immediately. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, the first time Ethan had ever seen her in casual clothes. It made her look younger, more human, less like an untouchable executive and more like someone who was genuinely, deeply afraid. "Come in," she said. The room was different tonight. The desk was covered with papers, a laptop, and what looked like surveillance equipment, small cameras, recording devices, things Ethan recognized from security catalogs. "What's all this?" he asked. Clara closed the door. "Our insurance policy. I told you I had a plan." Ethan moved closer to the desk, his eyes scanning the equipment with growing unease. The surveillance devices were professional grade, the kind that required significant investment and technical knowledge to operate effectively. Clara had been planning this for longer than he'd realized. "When you said you had a plan," he said slowly, "I thought you meant a legal strategy, a lawyer, maybe an accountant who could verify your evidence." "Those things are already in motion," Clara replied. She picked up one of the small cameras, turning it over in her hands. "But Richard isn't going to wait for due process. He's moving faster than I anticipated. This morning he scheduled a closed-door meeting with 3 board members for tomorrow afternoon. No agenda provided, no documentation required." "You think he's making his move?" "I know he is. One of the board members, Patricia Chen, is an old friend. She gave me a heads up. Richard told her he's uncovered evidence of fraud and needs to brief the board before it becomes a legal matter." Clara set the camera down with deliberate care. "He's going to accuse me tomorrow, which means we need the evidence from his laptop tonight." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "Tonight? That's impossible. You said you needed 72 hours. That was before Richard accelerated the timeline. We're out of time, Ethan. If we don't get that file tonight, it's over." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical presence. Ethan looked at the surveillance equipment again, understanding dawning with uncomfortable clarity. "You want to break into his office?" "I want to retrieve stolen property that belongs to this company," Clara corrected, though her expression acknowledged the distinction was semantic at best. "Richard leaves around 7 most nights. Security makes rounds every 45 minutes after 8 p.m. If we can get into his office during that window, we have enough time to clone his hard drive and get out without anyone knowing we were there." "That's not retrieval. That's breaking and entering. It's accessing company property in a company building where I have executive clearance." Claire's voice remained steady, but Ethan could hear the strain underneath. "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. You're asking me to help you burglarize the CFO's office. I'm asking you to help me prove he's a thief before he destroys both our careers." She moved to stand directly in front of him, her eyes locked on his. "I understand if this crosses a line you're not willing to cross, but I need you to understand that this is our only option. Richard has spent 18 months building his scheme. He's careful, methodical, and he's covered his tracks everywhere except that one file. If we don't get it tonight, it disappears forever." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be another way, a legal way, a way that didn't involve sneaking through darkened offices like common criminals. But looking at Clara's face, he saw the truth she wasn't saying out loud. She'd already tried every other option. "Walk me through it," he said quietly. "The whole plan." Relief flickered across Clara's features, quickly controlled. She moved to the laptop, pulled up a building schematic that Ethan recognized as Meridian Tower's floor plan. "Richard's office is here, northeast corner of the executive floor. It's accessible from the main corridor, but there's also a service entrance through the copy room that's used by cleaning staff." She traced the route with her finger. "Security cameras cover the main corridor and elevators, but the service entrance has a blind spot because it's considered a low security zone." "What about the office door itself?" "Electronic lock, but I have an executive override code that works on all 16th floor offices. Standard security protocol in case of emergency." Ethan studied the schematic, his IT background automatically cataloging vulnerabilities and risks. "The cameras in the main corridor will still record you entering and leaving the executive floor, even if you use the service entrance." "Not if I'm already on the floor when the relevant time period begins. I'll work late, which isn't unusual. Around 7:30, I'll move to the conference room near Richard's office, and stay there until the security guard makes his 8 p.m. round. Once he's clear, I access Richard's office through the service entrance. And me? Clara pulled up another window on the laptop, this one showing what looked like the building's network infrastructure. You'll be in the server room on the 15th floor. Your presence there is completely normal and wouldn't raise any questions even if someone checked the logs. When I'm inside Richard's office, you'll remotely disable the camera covering that section of corridor for exactly 8 minutes. 8 minutes isn't much time. It's enough. Once I'm inside, I'll use this. She held up a small external drive, matte black and no bigger than a deck of cards. You said you could clone a hard drive in under a minute. This device can do it in 45 seconds once connected. Ethan took the drive, examined it. Military-grade hardware, probably cost more than his monthly rent. Where did you get this? I'd rather not say, but it's clean, untraceable, and it works. Clara's expression was difficult to read. I've tested it. On what? My own laptop, multiple times. The cloning process is simple. Connect the drive to any open USB port, wait for the indicator light to turn from red to green, then disconnect. The entire hard drive copies over, including hidden files and deleted data. Everything. Ethan turned the drive over in his hands, feeling the smooth metal surface. This was real. This was actually happening. In less than an hour, he'd be helping Clara commit what was technically corporate espionage, even if the target was a thief and the motive was justice. What happens after you get the file? He asked. I spend the rest of tonight analyzing it, documenting everything, and building an airtight case. Tomorrow morning, before Richard can brief the board, I request an emergency meeting and present my evidence. With the digital signature from his laptop proving he personally authorized the fraudulent transfers, his entire defense collapses. And if something goes wrong tonight, if we get caught? Clara was quiet for a moment. Then we both lose everything. I'll be fired for unauthorized access to an executive's office. You'll be fired for helping me. Richard's accusations against us will seem validated, and he walks away clean. She met his eyes. I won't lie to you, Ethan. The risks are real. If you want to back out, do it now. Ethan thought about Sophie, asleep at home with Mr. Floppy tucked under her arm. Thought about the promises he'd made to her about honesty and integrity and standing up for what was right. Those promises had seemed so simple when he was reading bedtime stories and teaching moral lessons about sharing and telling the truth. They were harder now, so much harder. But they still mattered. I'm in, he said. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. They spent the next 40 minutes going over every detail. Clara showed him the camera system, explained the security guard's patterns, walked him through the timing with precision that spoke to hours of careful planning. Ethan made notes, asked questions, and tried to ignore the voice in his head screaming that this was insane. At 9:47 p.m., Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. What? Ethan asked. Richard just sent an email to the board, subject line, urgent financial irregularities requiring immediate attention. She read silently for a moment, her jaw clenching. He's moving even faster than I thought. He's requesting an emergency session tomorrow at 9 a.m. That's before you plan to present your evidence. Which means we're not just racing against time, we're racing against him. Clara looked up from her phone. If we don't get that file tonight, I walk into that meeting tomorrow with incomplete evidence and he destroys me before lunch. Ethan checked his watch. 9:48 p.m. They had just over 10 hours before Richard's meeting. Less than 2 hours before the building's night security protocols made their window of opportunity disappear. Then we'd better get moving, he said. They left the hotel separately. Clara first, walking out through the lobby with the confident stride of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be. Ethan waited 5 minutes, then followed, taking a different exit and circling around to where he'd parked his car 3 blocks away. The drive to Meridian Tower took 12 minutes through light traffic. Ethan parked in the employee lot, used his access badge to enter through the side entrance, and took the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid cameras. His heart hammered against his ribs with each step, adrenaline sharpening his senses until every sound seemed amplified. The 15th floor corridor was empty. Most of the IT staff had left hours ago, leaving only the ambient hum of servers and the soft glow of emergency lighting. Ethan made his way to the server room, used his keycard, and slipped inside. The room was cool, kept at precisely 68 degrees to prevent the equipment from overheating. Rows of servers blinked and hummed, their LED indicators casting strange shadows across the walls. Ethan had spent hundreds of hours in this room over the past 3 years, but it felt different tonight. Hostile somehow, like the machines knew what he was about to do and were sitting in judgment. He pulled out his phone. A text from Clara. In position, conference room. Waiting for guards, 8 p.m. round. Ethan replied, server room. Ready when you are. He settled into the chair at the main console and pulled up the building's security system. Accessing it was technically against protocol unless you had a specific work order, but Ethan had the credentials and nobody monitored who looked at the cameras unless there was an incident. He navigated through the interface, found the camera covering the northeast section of the 16th floor corridor. The feed showed an empty hallway, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors. Richard's office door was visible at the far end, closed and locked. Ethan studied the camera's position, calculating angles and blind spots. Clara was right. There was a brief section near the service entrance where someone could move without being directly in frame, but you had to know exactly where to walk and you couldn't hesitate. His phone buzzed. Guard just passed. Starting my approach. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He'd disabled security cameras before for legitimate maintenance reasons, but this was different. This was deliberate deception, tampering with evidence, the kind of thing that could result in criminal charges if anyone looked too closely. He thought about Richard Hernandez laughing in the cafeteria. Thought about $630,000 stolen while good people lost their jobs and budget cuts. Thought about Clara standing in that hotel room, asking him if he was the kind of person who believed doing the right thing mattered. He typed the command. The camera feed went dark. 8 minutes. That's all Clara had before the system automatically flagged the outage and sent an alert to the security office. 8 minutes to get into Richard's office, clone his hard drive, and get out without leaving evidence. Ethan watched the clock on his screen tick forward. 10:17 p.m., 10:18 p.m. Somewhere above him, Clara was moving through the shadows, using skills she'd never listed on any resume. He wondered where she'd learned to do this, wondered what kind of life she'd led before becoming a corporate executive, wondered if he'd ever really known her at all. At 10:21 p.m., his phone lit up with a message. Inside. Starting clone. 3 minutes gone. 5 left. Ethan pulled up the building's network traffic, watching the data flow from various systems. Everything looked normal. The security guard was on the 12th floor, making his rounds according to schedule. The cleaning crew was working on the 8th and 9th floors. Nobody was near the 16th floor except Clara. 10:22 p.m. 10:23 p.m. His phone buzzed. Problem. Laptop is locked. Need password. Ethan's stomach dropped. They hadn't considered this possibility. Richard was paranoid about security, but Clara had said he sometimes left his screen unlocked when he stepped away. Apparently not tonight. He texted back. Can you guess it? Already tried obvious ones. Nothing working. Need help. Ethan thought frantically. He had access to the company's password reset system, but using it would leave a digital trail showing he'd accessed Richard's credentials. That was evidence that couldn't be explained away. But without the password, this entire operation was pointless. He pulled up the password management system, navigated to Richard's account. The CFO's password was encrypted, but Ethan had administrative privileges that let him see password hints and reset dates. Richard had changed his password 3 weeks ago, right around the time Clara said he'd discovered her investigation. The hint read, First Truth. Ethan stared at those 2 words, trying to parse their meaning. First Truth. What did that mean? A philosophical reference, a personal memory, some kind of code phrase? He texted Clara. Password hint says First Truth. Mean anything to you? The response came 30 seconds later. No idea. Keep thinking. 10:24 p.m. 4 minutes left. Ethan forced himself to focus. Richard Hernandez, CFO. Careful, methodical, someone who planned everything meticulously. What would his first truth be? His first job? His first success? His first... Wait. Ethan pulled up Richard's employee profile, scanned through the biographical information. Born in Phoenix, Arizona. Attended Arizona State University. MBA from Wharton. First job was at a consulting firm called Viridian Analytics. Viridian. Latin root. Viridis. Truth. Try Viridian 1, Ethan texted. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. That's it. I'm in. Cloning now. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing he'd been holding his breath. 10:25 p.m. 3 minutes left. The clone would take 45 seconds according to Clara's specifications, which gave her 2 minutes and 15 seconds to disconnect, clean up any trace of her presence, and get out. It should be enough. It had to be enough. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Clara. It was an automated alert from the security system. Motion detected, floor 16, East Corridor. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He pulled up the camera feed, cycling through different angles. Most of the 16th floor was dark, but on the East Corridor he saw a figure moving. Security guard, flashlight in hand, walking directly toward the section where Clara was working. He wasn't supposed to be there. His route didn't include the executive floor until his midnight round. Ethan grabbed his phone, fingers shaking as he typed, "Guard incoming. East Corridor, 30 seconds." On the camera feed, the guard moved steadily closer. He was checking doors, routine patrol behavior, but routine was about to become catastrophic. In 20 seconds, he'd reach the service entrance. In 25, he'd see the service door propped open. In 30, he'd investigate and find Clara crouched beside Richard's desk with an external drive connected to the CFO's laptop. Ethan made a decision. He activated the fire alarm on the 14th floor. The building's emergency system triggered immediately, alarms blaring throughout the tower. The sound was deafening even through the walls of the server room. On the security feed, the guard stopped mid-step, listened, then turned and ran toward the stairwell, abandoning his patrol to respond to the emergency. Ethan's phone lit up. "What the hell was that? Fire alarm. Bought you time. How close are you? 30 seconds. Drive still cloning. 10:26 p.m. 2 minutes left before the camera outage triggered an alert. Ethan watched the guards on other floors respond to the alarm, evacuating the building according to protocol. The cleaning crew headed for the exits. A few late working employees emerged from offices, looking confused and annoyed. And on the 16th floor, Clara remained invisible, hidden in Richard's office, waiting for a small black drive to finish copying 630,000 reasons to expose a thief. Done. Getting out now. 10:27 p.m. 1 minute. Ethan pulled up the northeast corridor camera, ready to reactivate it the moment Clara was clear. The feed was still dark, but his finger hovered over the command that would bring it back online. The building's fire alarm shut off as suddenly as it had started. The security system had verified no actual fire on the 14th floor and canceled the evacuation. In the sudden silence, Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, rapid and loud. His phone buzzed, clear, service entrance. Moving to conference room. Ethan reactivated the camera. The feed flickered back to life, showing an empty corridor. No sign of Clara. No evidence anyone had been there. Richard's office door remained closed, locked, exactly as it had been 8 minutes ago. Ethan slumped back in his chair, adrenaline still flooding his system. They'd done it. Against every probability, despite the guard's unexpected patrol and Richard's locked laptop, they'd actually done it. Now came the hard part. He reset the fire alarm system, clearing the false trigger and logging it as a sensor malfunction. The security office would investigate, but false alarms happened occasionally and wouldn't raise suspicions unless someone looked for a connection to the camera outage. Ethan made sure his log showed he'd been in the server room for legitimate maintenance the entire time, working on network diagnostics that could easily explain his presence. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a new message. Leaving building. Meet me at the secondary location in 1 hour. Secondary location was a diner 6 blocks from the tower, chosen because it was public enough to seem innocuous but quiet enough for private conversation. Ethan waited another 15 minutes, ensuring his presence in the server room seemed natural, then logged out and left through the same side entrance he'd used to arrive. The night air felt sharp against his skin, cold and clean. Ethan walked to his car, started the engine, and sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, processing what they'd just done. They'd broken into an executive's office, stolen data from a company laptop, triggered a false fire alarm to avoid detection. Any one of those actions could result in termination and possibly criminal charges if discovered. But they'd also obtained evidence that could expose massive fraud and protect innocent people from a corrupt executive's schemes. The line between right and wrong had never felt more blurred. Ethan drove to the diner, parked in the back lot, and found Clara in a corner booth, hunched over a laptop with 2 cups of coffee cooling beside her. She looked up when he slid into the seat across from her, and Ethan saw something he'd never seen before in Clara Vaughn's eyes: triumph. "We got it," she said quietly. "Everything. Every fraudulent transaction, every fake vendor, every transfer, and his digital signature on all of it." Ethan felt tension drain from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. "It's enough." "It's more than enough. This is airtight, Ethan. Irrefutable. When I present this tomorrow, Richard won't have a defense." She turned the laptop toward him, showing him a spreadsheet that meant nothing to his untrained eye, but clearly meant everything to hers. "He's done." "What about his accusations against us?" "Irrelevant once this comes to light. The board will see immediately that his claims were defensive maneuvers, attempts to discredit the person investigating him. Everything he said about you helping me embezzle funds will be exposed as fabrication." Claire's expression softened slightly. "You're going to be okay, Ethan. I promise." He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that everything would work out the way she planned, that justice would prevail, and they'd both walk away from this intact. But he'd learned long ago that promises were fragile things. "Walk me through what happens tomorrow," he said. Clara closed the laptop, wrapped her hands around one of the coffee cups. "I've already sent an email to Patricia Chen requesting an emergency board meeting at 8 a.m., 1 hour before Richard's scheduled session. I cited evidence of financial fraud requiring immediate attention. Patricia will make sure the full board attends. And Richard won't know about the earlier meeting until he arrives for his 9 a.m. slot and finds the board already in session. By then, I'll have presented the evidence and the board will have voted to suspend him pending investigation." Clara's voice was steady, controlled. "Security will escort him from the building. His accounts will be frozen. And within 24 hours, federal investigators will be involved." Ethan tried to imagine Richard Hernandez's face when he realized his carefully constructed scheme had collapsed. Tried to imagine the man's rage, his disbelief, his desperate attempts to salvage a situation that had already spiraled beyond saving. "He'll know we did this," Ethan said quietly. "Even if he can't prove it, he'll know. Let him know. By the time he figures it out, he'll have much bigger problems than professional revenge." Clara was right, but that didn't ease the knot in Ethan's stomach. Men like Richard didn't go down quietly. They fought back with lawyers and leverage and every dirty trick they could devise. Even from prison, Richard could make their lives difficult if he chose to, but that was a problem for another day. "I should get home," Ethan said, checking his watch. 11:43 p.m. Mrs. Patterson would be asleep on his couch, the late-night crime dramas playing softly in the background. Sophie would be dreaming about whatever 6-year-olds dreamed about. His whole normal life was continuing without him, waiting for his return. "Ethan," Clara's voice stopped him as he started to slide out of the booth. "Thank you for everything, for believing me, for helping me, for being exactly the kind of person I hoped you were." "I'm not a hero, Clara. I'm just a guy who couldn't live with doing nothing." "That's what heroes are, people who act when others don't." She offered him a small smile, the first genuine one he'd ever seen from her. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be intense." Ethan drove home through empty streets, his mind too wired for sleep, but his body exhausted from adrenaline. He parked outside his building, climbed the stairs to his apartment, and found Mrs. Patterson exactly where he'd predicted, asleep on the couch with the television volume turned low. He paid her for the evening, helped her gather her things, and walked her to the door with profuse thanks and apologies for the late hour. She waved off his concerns, told him Sophie had been an angel, and shuffled off toward her own apartment down the hall. Ethan checked on Sophie. Still sleeping, Mr. Floppy clutched tight, one foot sticking out from under the covers. He tucked her leg back under the blanket, kissed her forehead gently, and retreated to the living room. He should sleep, should lie down on the pull-out couch and close his eyes, and let unconsciousness claim him for a few hours before the chaos of tomorrow began. But his mind wouldn't quiet. He kept seeing Clara's face in that hotel room, kept hearing her voice asking if he was the kind of person who believed doing the right thing mattered, kept feeling the weight of that external drive in his hand, knowing it contained evidence that would change lives and end careers. Somewhere across the city, Richard Hernandez was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his schemes, unaware that his world was about to detonate. Ethan wondered if that made him feel satisfied or just tired. At 2:34 a.m., he finally drifted into restless sleep, dreams full of darkened corridors and blinking cameras, and voices asking questions he couldn't answer. He woke at 6 a.m. to Sophie's alarm, dragged himself upright, and went through the mechanical motions of making breakfast. Sophie appeared in her pajamas, hair wild, and immediately sensed something different. "You look tired, Daddy." "Didn't sleep great, Munchkin." "Bad dreams?" "Something like that." She climbed into her chair, studied him with those two perceptive eyes. "Is today a big day?" Ethan poured orange juice into her unicorn cup, set it in front of her carefully. "Yeah, baby, today's a very big day." "Are you scared?" The question hit him harder than it should have. He looked at his daughter, 6 years old and already learning to read the emotional currents around her, and realized he couldn't lie. "A little bit," he admitted. Sophie considered this seriously. Then she reached across the table and patted his hand with her small fingers. "It's okay to be scared," she said. "Mrs. Martinez says brave people are scared, but they do the right thing anyway." Ethan's throat tightened. "Mrs. Martinez is a very smart lady." "I know. That's why I listened to her." Sophie went back to her cereal, apparently satisfied that she'd solved her father's problems with first-grade wisdom. And maybe she had. Ethan drove Sophie to school, walked her to the classroom, and hugged her a little tighter than usual before watching her disappear into the chaos of morning routines. Then he sat in his car, checked his phone, and saw a message from Clara sent 20 minutes ago. "Board meeting at 8 a.m. confirmed. All members attending." "This is it." Ethan typed back, "Good luck. You've got this. We've got this. I couldn't have done it without you." He drove to Meridian Tower, parked in his usual spot, and rode the elevator up to the 15th floor. The IT department was slowly coming to life. Marcus already at his desk with his usual 3 monitors glowing. "Morning," Marcus said without looking up. "You hear about the fire alarm last night?" Ethan's heart skipped. "What about it?" "False alarm on 14. Security's investigating whether it was a malfunction or someone playing pranks." Marcus finally glanced over. "You weren't here late, were you? Thought I saw your access badge in the logs." Server maintenance. Logged about 3 hours." Ethan kept his voice casual. "Didn't hear anything about a fire alarm." "Weird. Must have been after you left." Marcus turned back to his screens. "Anyway, big drama this morning. Heard there's an emergency board meeting happening right now. Something about financial irregularities." Ethan checked his watch. 8:07 a.m. Clara was in that room right now, presenting the evidence they'd risked everything to obtain, showing the board members the proof of Richard's theft, his manipulation, his schemes, ending a career, saving her own. The minutes crawled past. Ethan tried to focus on work, answering tickets and troubleshooting issues, but his attention kept drifting to his phone, waiting for word from Clara. At 9:15 a.m., his phone buzzed. "It's done." Richard just arrived for his 9 a.m. meeting and found the board already in session. Security is escorting him out now. It's over. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been clenched tight since that first message in the hotel corridor. It was over. They'd won. Ethan stared at Clara's message, reading it 3 times to make sure he'd understood correctly. Richard Hernandez, the man who'd seemed untouchable just 48 hours ago, was being escorted from the building by security. The scheme that had taken 18 months to construct had collapsed in less than 18 minutes. But the relief Ethan expected didn't come. Instead, he felt a strange hollowness, like the moment after a storm passes and you're left standing in the wreckage, trying to remember what normal felt like. Marcus's voice cut through his thoughts. "Dude, you seeing this?" Ethan looked up. Marcus was standing now, staring out the glass wall that separated the IT department from the main corridor. Other employees had gathered there too, watching something happening near the elevators. Ethan walked over, his stomach tightening. Richard Hernandez stood flanked by two security guards, his expensive suit looking somehow diminished in the harsh fluorescent lighting. His face was the color of ash, his jaw clenched so tight Ethan could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. He wasn't fighting, wasn't making a scene, but the fury radiating from him was palpable even from 50 feet away. Their eyes met across the corridor. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, Richard stared directly at Ethan. There was recognition in that gaze, calculation, the wheels turning as the CFO tried to piece together how his carefully constructed world had imploded so quickly. He didn't know yet, Ethan realized. Didn't know about the cloned hard drive or the late-night office intrusion or the IT technician who'd helped dismantle his empire. But he would figure it out eventually. The elevator doors opened. The security guards guided Richard inside, and then he was gone, descending toward the lobby and the parking lot and whatever came next for men who stole from their own companies. Holy hell, Marcus breathed. What do you think he did? No idea, Ethan lied. His phone buzzed again. Need to see you, conference room C, 10 a.m. Bring your employee ID. Ethan checked the time, 9:27 a.m. 33 minutes to prepare for whatever came next. He texted back a simple confirmation, then returned to his desk, mind racing through possibilities. Clara wouldn't summon him unless it was important, but the instruction to bring his ID felt ominous. Was this about verifying his employment? About documenting his role as a witness? Or was this where everything fell apart? The minutes dragged. Ethan tried to work, but his concentration was shattered. Around him, the office buzzed with speculation about Richard's departure. The rumors were already wild and getting wilder with each retelling. Embezzlement, insider trading. Some people even whispered about affairs and blackmail, the usual corporate gossip that filled the void when facts were scarce. Nobody mentioned Claire's name. Nobody suggested an IT technician might be involved. Not yet. At 9:58 a.m., Ethan stood, smoothed his cheap tie, and walked toward the elevators. Marcus called after him, asking where he was going, but Ethan just waved vaguely and kept moving. The ride to the 16th floor felt longer than it should have, each passing floor marker a countdown to something he couldn't quite name. Conference Room C was at the end of the executive corridor, a glass-walled space designed for important meetings with important people. Ethan had never been inside it before, had never had reason to be on this floor except for the occasional IT emergency. Clara was already there, standing at the head of the table. But she wasn't alone. 3 other people occupied chairs around the polished surface. Ethan recognized Patricia Chen from the company directory, a board member with steel gray hair and shrewd eyes. The other 2 were unfamiliar, but their expensive suits and confident postures marked them as executives or lawyers, or some combination of both. Mr. Cole, Clara said, her voice formally professional. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Ethan sat, feeling like he'd walked into an ambush. His employee ID felt heavy in his pocket. Patricia Chen spoke first, her voice crisp and direct. Mr. Cole, I'm Patricia Chen, board member and head of the audit committee. These are David Walsh, our corporate counsel, and Jennifer Santos from the board's ethics committee. We need to ask you some questions about recent events. Ethan's throat went dry. All right. You're aware that Richard Hernandez, our former CFO, was suspended this morning pending investigation into financial irregularities. I saw him being escorted out, Ethan said carefully. I don't know the details. Ms. Vaughn has provided us with extensive evidence of embezzlement and fraud. Patricia's gaze was penetrating, the kind that saw through polite deflections. Evidence that includes communications suggesting Mr. Hernandez was preparing to falsely implicate both Mrs. Vaughn and you in his schemes. I don't understand why he'd implicate me. I'm in IT. I have no access to financial systems. That's precisely what makes you useful as a scapegoat, David Walsh interjected. Mr. Hernandez's strategy appears to have been creating enough confusion and doubt to delay any investigation long enough for him to destroy evidence. He paused. Ms. Vaughn prevented that by acting quickly. We're here to verify certain details of her account. This was it. The moment where Ethan either told the truth or committed to a lie that would follow him forever. He glanced at Clara, but her expression gave nothing away. She'd reverted to her COO persona, professional and distant, as if they hadn't spent the last 2 nights conspiring in hotel rooms and breaking into offices. "What do you need to know?" Ethan asked. Jennifer Santos leaned forward, her dark eyes sharp. "Ms. Vaughn claims that Mr. Hernandez sent her communications explicitly threatening to accuse you of being her accomplice in embezzlement. Did you receive any similar communications?" "No, I had no direct contact with Mr. Hernandez." "Were you aware of Miss Vaughn's investigation into financial irregularities before this week?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "I became aware 2 days ago when Ms. Vaughn informed me of Mr. Hernandez's threats." "Why did she inform you specifically?" "Because the threats involved me. She felt I had a right to know I was being used as part of a cover-up." Patricia nodded slowly. "And what was your response when she told you this?" This was the fork in the road. Ethan could play ignorant, claim he'd simply been a victim of circumstance who happened to get caught in the crossfire between 2 executives. That would be the safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that protected him from any potential liability. But it would also be a lie. And lies had a way of unraveling at the worst possible moments. "I told her I'd help however I could," Ethan said quietly. "I told her that if she needed a witness to testify that I had no involvement in any financial schemes, I'd do it, that I'd tell the truth about my role, which was no role at all." The 3 board members exchanged glances. David Walsh made a note on his legal pad. "Did Ms. Vaughn ask you to do anything else?" Jennifer asked. "Access any systems, retrieve any information, perform any tasks outside your normal IT duties?" Here it was, the question that could either expose everything or be deflected with careful phrasing. Ethan felt sweat forming at the base of his spine. He looked at Clara again. This time she met his eyes, and for just a fraction of a second something passed between them. Not instruction, not manipulation, just acknowledgement of what they both knew to be true. They'd crossed lines, broken rules, done things that couldn't be undone, but they'd done them for the right reasons. "Ms. Vaughn asked me if I knew how someone might access a locked laptop remotely," Ethan said slowly. "She was trying to understand Mr. Hernandez's technical capabilities, whether he could have accessed systems to create the false evidence he was threatening to manufacture." It wasn't exactly a lie. Clara had asked about laptop access, just not in the context Ethan was describing, but it was close enough to the truth to be defensible while obscure enough to avoid admitting to anything criminal. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what did you tell her?" "That someone with administrative privileges could potentially access another user's files remotely, but it would leave traces in the system logs. That any tampering would be detectable if you knew where to look." "Did you check those logs?" "Yes. I found no evidence of unauthorized access to my accounts or any attempts to plant false information." That, at least, was completely true. Ethan had checked his own logs thoroughly, confirming Richard hadn't actually followed through on his threats yet. David Walsh set down his pen. "Mr. Cole, I want to be very clear about something. This board takes allegations of fraud extremely seriously. We also take seriously any actions taken in response to those allegations. If anyone violated company policy or legal boundaries during this investigation, there will be consequences regardless of their motivations." Ethan's pulse hammered. "I understand. Do you have anything else you want to tell us? Anything that might become relevant as we conduct our formal investigation?" This was his last chance to come clean, to admit to the office break-in, the cloned hard drive, the disabled security cameras, to throw himself on the mercy of people who might understand that desperate times called for desperate measures. But looking at their faces, Ethan saw no mercy waiting, only calculation, legal liability, corporate protocols that cared more about proper procedure than actual justice. "No," he said. "I've told you everything relevant." The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Patricia nodded briskly. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. We appreciate your cooperation. You're free to return to your duties. If we have additional questions, we'll contact you through official channels." She paused. "And Mr. Cole? The board wants you to know that we recognize you've been placed in an extremely difficult position through no fault of your own. Your name has been cleared of any association with Mr. Hernandez's activities. That will be communicated formally to all relevant parties. Ethan stood on shaky legs. Thank you. He walked to the door, hyper-aware of the eyes following him. Just before stepping into the corridor, he heard Clara's voice. Mr. Cole. He turned. Thank you for your integrity, Clara said, her tone still formally professional, but her eyes conveying something deeper. The company needs more people like you. Ethan nodded once, then left before anyone could ask more questions he didn't want to answer. The walk back to the IT department felt surreal, like moving through water. His coworkers were still buzzing about Richard's departure, trading theories and speculation. Marcus caught his arm as he passed. Where'd you go? You look like you've seen a ghost. Executive meeting. They wanted to know about security protocols. Another lie, easier than the last. Nothing interesting. This whole day is interesting. Did you hear they're bringing in federal investigators? Apparently Richard stole over $500,000. Can you believe that? Ethan could believe it. Had seen the evidence, read the spreadsheets, understood exactly how Richard had siphoned money from Meridian Solutions, while people like Marcus and himself worked overtime for modest salaries and uncertain futures. It's crazy, he agreed, settling back into his chair. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks that felt absurd in their normalcy. Ethan rebooted servers, answered help desk tickets, and troubleshot network issues as if his entire world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Around 3 p.m., an company-wide email went out from the CEO announcing Richard Hernandez's immediate termination and the launch of an internal investigation. The language was carefully neutral, promising transparency and accountability while revealing nothing substantive. Clara's name wasn't mentioned, neither was Ethan's. At 5 p.m., Ethan shut down his computer and headed for the exit, exhausted despite having accomplished almost nothing all day. The parking lot was half empty, most employees having fled early to escape the day's drama. He was unlocking his car when his phone buzzed. Can we talk? Not at the office, same diner as last night, 7 p.m.? Ethan stared at Clara's message, debating. Part of him wanted to say no, to put distance between himself and the whole situation, to return to his daughter and his normal life and pretend the last 3 days had never happened. But he owed Clara more than that. I'll be there. He picked up Sophie from school, took her to the park, and went through their Thursday routine with mechanical precision. Sophie chattered about her day, oblivious to her father's distraction, and Ethan made appropriate responses while his mind churned through everything that had happened. They'd gotten away with it. That was the truth he kept circling back to. Richard was finished, Clara's career was saved, and nobody knew about the office break-in or the cloned hard drive. They'd committed crimes in service of justice and emerged unscathed. So why did Ethan feel like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop? At 6:45 p.m., Mrs. Patterson arrived to babysit. Sophie gave Ethan a knowing look. Another big day tomorrow, Daddy? I don't think so, Munchkin. I think things are going to be normal again. Good. Normal is nice sometimes. Ethan kissed the top of her head, struck again by how much wisdom lived in such a small person. Yeah, baby. Normal is nice. The diner was quiet when he arrived, the dinner rush not yet started. Clara sat in the same booth as the night before, but she looked different. The tension that had defined her for the past 3 days was gone, replaced by something that might have been relief, or might have been exhaustion, or might have been both. Ethan slid into the seat across from her. How bad is it? How bad is what? The fallout, the investigation, all of it. Clara smiled faintly. It's not bad. It's actually remarkably good, all things considered. Richard's lawyer spent the afternoon trying to negotiate some kind of deal, but the evidence is too overwhelming. The federal investigators are taking over tomorrow, which means this becomes a criminal matter rather than just corporate discipline. And your role in obtaining that evidence? Nobody's asking uncomfortable questions yet. The board is satisfied that I acted appropriately in investigating suspected fraud. They're treating me as a whistleblower, not a vigilante. Clara's expression grew more serious. That could change if anyone looks too closely at the timeline or starts wondering how I got access to Richard's laptop. But for now, we're in the clear. We. The word hung between them, a reminder of the partnership they'd formed in crisis and the secrets they now shared. I lied in that meeting, Ethan said quietly. To the board. Multiple times. I know, so did I, by omission if not directly. Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I've been thinking about that all day, about what we did and whether it was justified. And? I don't have a good answer. We broke laws, violated policies, took actions that could have destroyed us both if they'd gone wrong. She paused. But a thief is going to prison because of what we did. Money will be recovered. And people who had nothing to do with any of this won't lose their jobs to budget cuts designed to hide embezzlement. Ethan understood what she was saying. The ends didn't justify the means, not exactly, but sometimes the means were the only option available when the system failed. What happens now? He asked. Now? Life goes on. Richard faces prosecution. The company implements new financial oversight protocols. And you and I go back to being a COO and an IT technician who had a brief professional interaction during a corporate crisis. Clara's voice was neutral, but Ethan heard the subtext. They couldn't be friends, couldn't maintain any kind of relationship that might invite scrutiny or raise questions about their connection. The partnership that had formed in a hotel corridor was dissolving before it had fully formed. I understand, Ethan said. Do you? Clara leaned forward slightly. Because I need you to understand something, Ethan. What you did, the risk you took, the integrity you showed, that matters. Not just to me personally, but to this company and everyone who works here. You could have walked away, could have protected yourself and left me to fight alone. But you didn't. I did what anyone should have done, but most people wouldn't have. That's what makes it significant. Clara pulled an envelope from her bag, slid it across the table. The board met in executive session this afternoon. In addition to dealing with Richard, we discussed other personnel matters. Ethan opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a formal letter on company letterhead. He scanned the first paragraph and felt his breath catch. It was a promotion. IT systems manager, a position 2 levels above his current role. The salary was nearly double what he currently made. The benefits package included better health insurance, education allowances for dependents, and a retirement contribution that would actually matter. I don't understand, he said. This doesn't make sense. I didn't do anything to earn this. Yes, you did. You performed critical security analysis during a corporate crisis. You verified system integrity when there were concerns about data manipulation. You demonstrated reliability and discretion during an extremely sensitive situation. Claire's eyes held his. Those are all true statements, Ethan. They're also the official justification for your promotion. The board approved it unanimously. Ethan stared at the letter, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just recognition. This was protection. By promoting him and attaching his name to the official investigation in a positive way, Clara and the board were ensuring that if questions arose later, Ethan's involvement would seem natural and authorized rather than suspicious. It was brilliant, and it was more than he'd ever expected. I don't know what to say, he managed. Say you'll accept it. Say you'll keep being the person you are. Say you'll remember that sometimes doing the right thing actually does matter, even in a world that often suggests otherwise. Clara's voice softened. And say you'll give your daughter the life she deserves. Ethan thought about Sophie, about the opportunities this promotion would create. Better schools, a bigger apartment, dance lessons or art classes or whatever else she wanted to try. The security of knowing that one unexpected expense wouldn't destroy their carefully balanced budget. I'll accept it, he said. And Clara, thank you for everything. Thank you, Ethan, for reminding me why I chose this career in the first place. They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that this was goodbye in a way that mattered. They'd see each other in the office, pass in hallways, maybe exchange polite greetings in elevators. But the connection forged in crisis couldn't survive in daylight. Some partnerships existed only in the storm. Clara stood first, gathering her bag. Take care of yourself, Mr. Cole. The company is lucky to have you. Good luck with everything, Miss Vaughn. She left through the front entrance, walking with that same confident stride that had always defined her. Ethan watched her go, then looked down at the letter again, reading the words that would change his life. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Patterson, asking if he'd be home soon. He texted back that he was on his way, paid for the coffees, and walked out into the evening air. The drive home felt different this time, lighter somehow. The weight he'd been carrying for 3 days had lifted, replaced by something that might have been hope, or might have been possibility, or might have been both. Sophie was still awake when he arrived, supposed to be in bed but clearly having negotiated extra time with Mrs. Patterson. She ran to Ethan when he walked through the door, and he scooped her up, holding her tight. "Guess what, Munchkin?" "What?" "Daddy got a new job today. A better one." Sophie pulled back to look at his face, her expression serious. "Did you do something brave?" The question surprised him. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you were scared this morning, and now you look happy, so you must have done the brave thing." Ethan's throat tightened. His daughter understood him better than he sometimes understood himself. "Yeah, baby, I did the brave thing." "Good. I'm proud of you, Daddy." Those 5 words hit harder than anything that had happened in the boardroom or the diner or anywhere else. Ethan held his daughter close, feeling the truth of what Clara had said settling into his bones. He'd done the right thing. He'd stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. He'd risked everything because the alternative was living as someone he couldn't respect. And somehow, impossibly, it had actually worked out. After Mrs. Patterson left and Sophie was finally asleep, Ethan sat on his pull-out couch and allowed himself to fully process the day. Richard Hernandez was gone, his career destroyed by his own greed and Clara's determination. The money he'd stolen would be recovered. Justice, imperfect and messy as it was, had been served. But Ethan also understood that they'd gotten lucky. If the guards' patrol had been different, if Richard's laptop had better security, if any one of a dozen variables had shifted slightly, everything could have gone wrong. They could be facing criminal charges instead of promotions. Ruin instead of vindication. The line between hero and criminal had been razor thin, and they'd walked it in the dark. His phone buzzed one last time. Claire's message was brief. "Sleep well, Ethan. You earned it." He typed back a simple response. "You too." Then he set the phone aside, turned off the lights, and lay down on the couch that would soon be replaced by an actual bed in an actual bedroom in a better apartment. He thought about all the ways his life was about to change, all the opportunities that had just opened up for Sophie. But mostly, he thought about the man he'd shown himself to be when everything was on the line. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Cole felt proud of who he saw in the mirror. The morning after felt strange in its ordinariness. Ethan woke to Sophie's alarm, made breakfast with hands that no longer shook, and drove his daughter to school through familiar streets that looked exactly the same as they had a week ago. The world hadn't changed. Only his place in it had shifted, and the difference was invisible to everyone except him. At Meridian Tower, the parking lot buzzed with an energy that felt almost electric. Employees clustered in small groups near their cars, voices low and urgent as they dissected yesterday's events. Ethan caught fragments of conversation as he walked toward the entrance. "Federal agents were here until midnight. Heard they found evidence going back 2 years. Can't believe he thought he'd get away with it." Nobody looked at Ethan. Nobody knew that the quiet IT technician passing by had been instrumental in bringing down the man they were all discussing. He was invisible again, returned to the comfortable anonymity he'd occupied for 3 years. Except now the invisibility felt different, chosen rather than imposed. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was crowded, everyone talking over each other about Richard and the investigation and what it all meant for the company. Ethan stood in the back corner, silent, listening to people construct narratives from incomplete information. Some were surprisingly close to the truth. Others were wildly off base, spinning tales of corporate espionage and international conspiracies that would have been funny if they weren't so absurd. Marcus was already at his desk when Ethan arrived, but instead of his usual 3 monitors of code, he was reading something on his phone with intense concentration. "You see the news?" Marcus asked without preamble. "What news?" "Wall Street Journal broke the story an hour ago. Richard Hernandez, CFO of Meridian Solutions, arrested on federal embezzlement charges. They're saying it's over $600,000. Marcus looked up, his expression caught between shock and something that might have been excitement. "This is huge, man. This is career-ending, go to prison, huge." Ethan set down his bag, powered on his computer. I guess the investigators move fast. Fast? Dude, they had him in custody before dawn. Federal agents showed up at his house at 5 a.m. with a warrant. His lawyer's already talking about a plea deal. Marcus scrolled through his phone. But here's the crazy part. The article says the fraud was uncovered by an internal investigation led by Clara Vaughn. Our COO, she's being called a hero for exposing it before it got worse. The word hero hit Ethan oddly. Clara deserved recognition, no question about that. She'd risked her career, her reputation, everything she'd built. But the full story would never be told. Nobody would know about the hotel room meetings, or the cloned hard drive, or the fire alarm that had saved them both. History was written by the winners, but only the parts they chose to share. Good for her, Ethan said neutrally. Good for all of us. Imagine if this had gone on for another year. The company could have been in real trouble. Marcus finally turned back to his monitors. Oh, and speaking of good news, did you hear about your promotion? Kelly in HR was talking about it this morning. IT Systems Manager. That's a serious jump, man. Congratulations. Word traveled fast in an office, especially good news that gave people something positive to discuss amid the chaos. Ethan had known the promotion would become public knowledge, but he hadn't expected it to spread quite this quickly. Thanks. I'm still processing it. How'd you even swing that? Did you have something to do with the investigation? It was an innocent question asked with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion, but it still made Ethan's pulse spike. I did some security analysis, he said carefully. Verified that our systems hadn't been compromised. Clara wanted to make sure Richard hadn't manipulated any IT infrastructure as part of his scheme. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. Marcus nodded, accepting the explanation without digging deeper. Makes sense. System security is huge in fraud cases. He grinned. Either way, good for you. About time someone around here got recognized for actually doing their job. The morning passed in a blur of congratulations from coworkers Ethan barely knew. People who'd walked past his desk for 3 years without acknowledgement suddenly wanted to shake his hand and express their excitement about his promotion. The attention was uncomfortable, but Ethan endured it with polite gratitude, aware that this was part of the price of visibility. At 10:30 a.m., an email appeared in his inbox from Human Resources, asking him to come down for paperwork processing. The HR department was on the 3rd floor, a maze of cubicles and conference rooms that always smelled faintly of coffee and stress. Ethan found the right office and was greeted by a woman named Susan who looked harried but friendly. Mr. Cole, congratulations on your promotion. Let's get you set up with the new contract and benefits information. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, already covered in forms and folders. This should take about an hour. I know it's tedious, but there's a lot to cover. Ethan sat, signed where indicated, and listened to Susan explain health insurance upgrades and retirement contribution matches and vacation accrual rates. The numbers still didn't feel real. The salary alone was more than he'd ever imagined making, let alone the additional benefits that came with a management position. Your official start date in the new role is next Monday, Susan said, sliding another form across the desk. But you'll transition gradually over the next 2 weeks, working with your replacement to ensure continuity. We're also enrolling you in the management training program, which includes courses on leadership, team building, and strategic planning. Management training? Ethan repeated. He'd been promoted to manage systems, not people. At least that's what he'd assumed. All managers go through it. You'll be overseeing a team of 3 technicians plus coordinating with other departments on infrastructure projects. The training helps prepare you for those responsibilities. Susan smiled. Don't worry, you'll do great. Clara Vaughn specifically requested you for this position, and she doesn't make recommendations lightly. Clara's name hung in the air between them. Ethan wondered how much Susan knew, how much anyone really knew about what had happened behind the scenes. But Susan's expression remained cheerful and professional, betraying nothing beyond the surface details. I appreciate the confidence, Ethan said. You've earned it. Now, let's talk about your daughter's educational benefits. As a manager, you're eligible for the company's dependent scholarship program. The conversation shifted to practicalities, to forms and signatures and logistics that would shape Ethan's immediate future. By the time he left HR 90 minutes later, his head was spinning with information about dental coverage and stock options and professional development allowances. He was walking back toward the elevators when he saw Clara. She emerged from a conference room surrounded by 3 people in dark suits that screamed, "Federal Investigator." Clara's expression was composed but tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from hours of detailed questioning. Their eyes met across the corridor for just a moment, and Ethan saw acknowledgement there. A brief flash of shared understanding before Clara's attention returned to the investigators flanking her. They passed without speaking, strangers again in any way that mattered to outside observers. Ethan continued to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. A woman in her 50s joined him, someone from accounting he'd seen around but never spoken to. She glanced at him, did a double take. "You're Ethan Cole, right? The one who got promoted?" "That's right." "I heard you helped expose Richard's fraud. That took guts." She smiled warmly. "We need more people willing to stand up around here." The elevator arrived before Ethan could respond. They rode up in silence, but the woman's words echoed in his mind. The narrative was crystallizing, becoming the official version of events. Ethan Cole, honest IT technician, had helped Clara Vaughn uncover fraud through diligent security analysis. It was simple, clean, and completely inadequate to capture what had actually happened, but it was the story they'd live with. Back at his desk, Ethan tried to focus on work, tried to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of tickets and troubleshooting and system maintenance, but concentration proved elusive. His mind kept returning to that moment in the corridor, to Clara's tired eyes and the federal investigators who were slowly piecing together Richard's 18-month scheme. At 2:15 p.m., another email arrived. This one from Clara's assistant, scheduling a meeting for Friday afternoon to discuss Ethan's transition into his new role. The language was purely professional, the kind of message any manager might send to a newly promoted employee, but Ethan understood the subtext. They needed to talk, one final time, to ensure their stories remained aligned as the investigation progressed. The rest of the day crawled past. Ethan answered questions from coworkers, fielded messages from people he hadn't heard from in months, suddenly interested in reconnecting, and tried to maintain the appearance of someone whose life hadn't just been completely upended. At 5 p.m., he escaped to his car and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, just breathing, before starting the engine and driving to Sophie's school. His daughter was waiting on the steps with her backpack and her usual post-school energy, talking to another girl about something that required dramatic hand gestures. Sophie spotted Ethan's car and waved goodbye to her friend, then bounded over with a grin that made everything else fade to background noise. "Daddy, guess what happened today?" "What happened, Munchkin?" "Mrs. Martinez said my spelling test was perfect, 100%. Sophie climbed into the back seat, still beaming. "She put a gold star on it and everything. That's amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you." "And Lily asked if I wanted to come to her birthday party next month. Can I go, please?" Ethan glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, at her hopeful expression and the smudge of playground dirt on her cheek. A month ago, he would have had to check the budget, calculate whether they could afford a birthday present, worry about the logistics of getting her to and from the party. Now those concerns felt distant, manageable. The promotion had bought him something more valuable than money. It had bought him breathing room. "Of course you can go," he said. "We'll get Lily a really nice present." "The best present," Sophie agreed confidently. Then, after a pause, "Daddy, you seem different today. Happy different." "Things are getting better, sweetheart. Daddy got some good news at work." "The new job?" "Yeah, it means we're going to have more money for things. Better things." Ethan navigated through traffic, choosing his words carefully. "We might be able to move to a bigger apartment, one where you could have your own room, and I wouldn't have to sleep on the couch anymore." Sophie's eyes went wide. "My own room? Like with a real bed and everything?" "With a real bed and your own closet and space for all your toys." "That would be so cool." Then Sophie's expression turned thoughtful. "But I like our apartment. All my friends are there. And Mrs. Patterson. We don't have to move far, maybe just a different building in the same neighborhood." Ethan smiled at her in the mirror. "We'll figure it out together, okay?" "Okay." Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer. She pulled out a book from her backpack and started reading, content in the way only children could be when their immediate world felt secure. Ethan drove them to the grocery store, a trip he'd been putting off for days because of everything else happening. They walked the aisles together, Sophie riding in the cart like she always did, despite being a bit too big for it. And for the first time in recent memory, Ethan didn't scrutinize every price tag. He bought the good cereal instead of the store brand, added fresh fruit that wasn't on sale, picked up a cut of meat that would make a real dinner instead of another box of pasta. At the checkout, the total came to more than he'd usually spend, but the number didn't trigger his usual anxiety. The promotion hadn't even started yet, and already it was changing how he thought about basic necessities. "Why are you smiling?" Sophie asked as they loaded bags into the car. "Just happy, Munchkin. Just happy." That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime routine, Ethan sat on his pull-out couch with his laptop and started looking at apartment listings. Two-bedroom places in their neighborhood, still affordable with his new salary but significantly nicer than what they currently had. Units with actual kitchens instead of glorified alcoves. Living rooms that didn't double as his bedroom. Windows that let in real light. He bookmarked several possibilities, already imagining Sophie's reaction to her own space, already planning how he'd set up her room, what furniture they'd need, how much better their lives could be with just a little more financial security. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Chen. Clara gave me your contact info. The board would like to meet with you next Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. Just a brief conversation to formally acknowledge your role in the investigation and discuss future opportunities. Nothing to worry about. Regards, Patricia." Ethan stared at the message, pulse quickening. The board wanted to meet with him, not HR, not his direct supervisor, but the actual board of directors. Either this was exactly what Patricia said, a courtesy meeting to recognize his contribution, or it was something else entirely. He texted back a polite confirmation, then set the phone aside and tried not to spiral into anxiety about what Tuesday might bring. The next 3 days passed in a strange, liminal space. Work continued, Richard's arrest dominated office gossip, and Ethan navigated the attention from his promotion while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The federal investigation progressed rapidly, with agents interviewing employees and combing through financial records. Ethan was questioned briefly by an FBI agent on Thursday afternoon, a conversation that lasted 20 minutes and covered his role in verifying system security. He stuck to the agreed-upon narrative, answered questions truthfully within the bounds of what he was willing to reveal. The agent seemed satisfied and moved on to other witnesses. Friday afternoon arrived, bringing with it the scheduled meeting with Clara. Ethan took the elevator to the 16th floor at precisely 3 p.m., as instructed, and was directed to Clara's office by her assistant. The office was exactly what Ethan expected. Sleek, minimal, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Clara sat behind a modern desk that probably cost more than Ethan's car, reviewing something on her laptop. She looked up when he entered, gestured to one of the chairs facing her desk. "Close the door, please." Ethan obeyed, then sat, acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. This was Clara's domain, her territory. Whatever partnership they'd formed in crisis didn't extend to this corporate space. "How are you holding up?" Clara asked, her tone more personal than he'd expected. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It all still feels surreal." "It will for a while. These kinds of situations tend to linger." She closed the laptop, gave him her full attention. The federal investigation is progressing well. Richard's lawyer is pushing for a plea deal, which suggests he knows the evidence is overwhelming. Assuming he accepts, this will be wrapped up within a few months rather than dragging out for years. That's good news. It is, but it also means the investigators are being thorough. They're looking at everything, talking to everyone, building a case that will hold up in court. Clara's expression remained neutral, but Ethan heard the warning underneath. "So far, nothing has emerged that contradicts our official account of how the evidence was obtained. I want to keep it that way." "I haven't told anyone anything," Ethan said quietly. "And I won't." "I know. I trust you, Ethan. I just need to make sure we're aligned on a few details before your meeting with the board on Tuesday." Clara opened a folder on her desk, pulled out several pages. "They're going to ask about your involvement in the investigation, about what you did and when you did it. I've prepared talking points that match the timeline we've established." She slid the pages across the desk. Ethan scanned them, recognizing the careful construction of half-truths and strategic omissions. Everything was technically accurate while revealing nothing about the hotel meetings, or the office break-in, or any of the actions that had actually made the difference. Memorize these, Clara said. Not word for word, but understand the framework. The board wants to recognize your contribution publicly, which is good for both of us. It reinforces the legitimacy of the investigation and positions you as someone who can be trusted with sensitive matters. And if they ask questions that go beyond these talking points, deflect to me. Say that I can provide more detailed technical information about the investigation process. The board respects boundaries around ongoing federal matters. Clara leaned back in her chair. They're on our side, Ethan. They want this to be a success story about good corporate governance triumphing over fraud. They're not looking to poke holes in the narrative. Ethan understood what she was really saying. The board wanted a clean story. Heroes and villains clearly defined. Asking too many questions would complicate that narrative and potentially expose actions that were legally questionable, even if morally justified. I'll be careful, he promised. I know you will. Clara's expression softened slightly. How's Sophie doing? The question surprised him. They'd never discussed his daughter directly, though Clara obviously knew about her from his employee file. She's good, excited about the promotion. We're looking at bigger apartments. Good. She deserves stability. You both do. Clara paused, seemed to be weighing her next words. I want you to know that the promotion wasn't just about covering our tracks or ensuring your cooperation. You genuinely deserve the opportunity. Your work has always been solid, and you have the integrity this company needs in management. Thank you. That means a lot. I also want you to know that this is the last time we'll have a conversation like this. After Tuesday's board meeting, we go back to being a COO and an IT manager with a purely professional relationship. No more secret meetings, no more coded messages. What happened this week stays buried. It was the farewell Ethan had been expecting since that night in the diner, but hearing it stated so explicitly still stung. They'd been through something extraordinary together, had trusted each other with things that could destroy them both, and now that bond had to be severed for the sake of self-preservation. I understand, Ethan said. Do you? Clara's eyes searched his face. Because I need you to really understand, Ethan. We can't be friends. We can't have coffee or lunch or casual conversations that might make people wonder about the nature of our relationship. In every observable way, you need to be just another employee I promoted based on merit. Even though that's not the whole truth. Especially because that's not the whole truth. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. The best lies are built on foundations of truth. Your promotion is legitimate. Your role in the investigation was valuable. Everything else is context that no one needs to know. Ethan nodded slowly, accepting the reality of what came next. They'd crossed lines together, but now they had to pretend those lines had never been blurred. Is there anything else I should know before Tuesday? He asked. Just be yourself. Be honest within the parameters we've established. And remember that you did nothing wrong that matters in any way that counts. Clara stood, signaling the end of the meeting. You're going to do great things in your new role, Ethan. I'm looking forward to seeing what you accomplish. It was a dismissal, polite and final. Ethan stood as well, understanding that this conversation was truly the end of something that had been brief but significant. Thank you, Clara, for everything. Thank you, Ethan, for being exactly who I needed when it mattered most. He left her office, walked past her assistant without making eye contact, and took the elevator back down to the 15th floor. The talking points from Clara's folder were folded in his pocket, a script for Tuesday's performance. Ethan would study them over the weekend, would prepare himself to sit across from the board, and present a version of events that was true enough to be believable and false enough to protect them both. The weekend passed quickly. Ethan took Sophie to the park, visited 2 of the apartments he'd bookmarked, and spent Saturday evening helping her practice spelling words while trying not to think about Tuesday morning. On Sunday, they went to the library and checked out a stack of books that Sophie immediately started reading, her appetite for stories apparently insatiable. Daddy, do you think we'll always be okay now? Sophie asked that night, her voice drowsy as Ethan tucked her into bed. What do you mean, Munchkin? Like, will we always have enough money and a good place to live? Or could things get bad again? The question hit Ethan hard. Sophie was too young to remember the worst times, the months right after his divorce when he'd been scrambling to keep food on the table and the lights on. But she'd picked up on the stress, the constant worry, the fear that had colored his every decision. "Things can always change," he said honestly. "But Daddy's got a better job now, and we're going to be smarter about saving money. We'll build up what's called a safety net, so if something unexpected happens, we'll be okay." Like a safety net in the circus? Exactly like that. It catches you if you fall. Sophie seemed to consider this, her eyes already closing. "That's good. I don't want you to be scared anymore." "I'm not scared, baby. Not anymore." It was mostly true. The immediate crisis had passed, the danger had been navigated. What remained was just the ordinary anxiety of building a life and trying not to screw it up too badly. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth. Ethan dressed carefully in his best suit, dropped Sophie at school with an extra-long hug, and arrived at Meridian Tower 30 minutes early. He sat in his car, reviewing Clara's talking points one final time, committing the framework to memory. At 8:55 a.m., he entered the building and took the elevator to the 18th floor, where the boardroom occupied prime real estate with panoramic views of the city. Clara's assistant met him at the reception area, offered him coffee that he declined, and escorted him to the boardroom at precisely 9 a.m. The space was intimidating in its elegance. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs. 6 people sat waiting, including Patricia Chen and Clara Vaughn. The others Ethan didn't recognize, but their expensive clothes and confident postures marked them as people accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. "Mr. Cole, thank you for joining us." Patricia gestured to an empty chair. "Please, sit. We won't take much of your time." Ethan sat, hyper-aware of every eye in the room focused on him. This was it, the final performance in a drama that had consumed his life for the past week. Patricia opened a folder, glanced at its contents briefly, then looked up with a warm smile. "On behalf of the board, I want to personally thank you for your role in uncovering Richard Hernandez's fraud. Your diligence in verifying system security and your willingness to support Ms. Vaughn's investigation demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity we value at Meridian Solutions." "I was just doing my job," Ethan said, the response he'd practiced. "You went beyond your job description," another board member interjected, a man in his 60s with silver hair. "You could have looked the other way, could have decided it wasn't your problem. Instead, you chose to help ensure the company's financial security. That's commendable." The praise felt unearned, built on foundations of deception, but Ethan accepted it with appropriate humility, aware that refusing recognition would raise more questions than accepting it. Patricia continued, "We wanted to meet with you for 2 reasons. First, to formally acknowledge your contribution and to let you know that this board sees you as someone with significant potential for advancement within the company. Second, to offer you an opportunity." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What kind of opportunity?" "We're creating a new position, Director of IT Security and Compliance. It's a senior role, reporting directly to the executive team, responsible for ensuring that what happened with Richard never happens again." Patricia's expression was serious. "We want someone in that role who has proven they can't be bought, intimidated, or manipulated. Someone with technical expertise and moral backbone. We'd like you to consider accepting this position." The room fell silent. Ethan stared at Patricia, trying to process what she'd just said. Director. A title that would put him in direct contact with the highest levels of the company. A role with real authority, and presumably a salary, to match. It was more than he'd ever imagined. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say you'll think about it," Clara said, speaking for the first time. "It's a significant responsibility, and you should take time to consider whether it aligns with your career goals and personal situation." Her voice was carefully neutral, but Ethan caught the subtext. This offer was real, not just another cover story. The board genuinely wanted him in this role, convinced by the narrative they'd constructed that Ethan Cole was exactly the kind of person who could protect the company's interests. "I'll definitely think about it," Ethan said. "Thank you for considering me." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, covering logistics and expectations and the timeline for his decision. Ethan answered questions, maintained his composure, and played the role of the humble employee grateful for recognition. When they finally dismissed him, he walked out of the boardroom feeling like he'd just survived an interrogation disguised as a celebration. Clara caught up with him at the elevators. "That went well," she said quietly. "Did you know they were going to offer me that position?" "I suspected. The board's been looking for ways to prevent future incidents. Creating a dedicated security role makes sense, and you're the logical choice given your involvement." Claire's expression was unreadable. "You should take it, Ethan. You've earned the opportunity to do real good here." "Earned it through deception. Earned it through courage and integrity when it mattered most." Claire's voice dropped lower. "What we did, the choices we made, they weren't perfect, but they were necessary. And now you have a chance to build something positive from all of it. Don't let guilt rob you of that." The elevator arrived. Ethan stepped inside, turned to face Clara one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. "Take care of yourself, Ethan, and take care of Sophie. She's lucky to have you as a father." The doors closed, severing the connection. Ethan rode down alone, his mind spinning with possibilities and implications and the weight of decisions still to be made. When he reached his desk, Marcus immediately pounced. "So, what'd the board want?" "They offered me another promotion, Director of IT Security." Marcus's jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me? That's huge. When did they even create that position?" "Today, apparently." "Man, you've got some kind of luck, or Clara Vaughn really likes you." Marcus grinned. "Either way, congratulations. This is incredible." Luck. The word felt wrong, insufficient to describe what had actually happened. But Ethan accepted Marcus's congratulations and settled into his chair, pulling up his email to find his inbox flooded with messages. One stood out, sent from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "From a friend." Ethan opened it cautiously. "Mr. Cole, you don't know me, but I wanted to reach out personally. I worked for Richard Hernandez for 3 years. I saw things that bothered me, suspected he was doing something wrong, but I never had the courage to speak up. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I needed to protect my own career. Reading about how he was caught, how someone finally stood up to him, it made me realize how much I failed. You did what I should have done. Thank you for having the strength I lacked. You saved this company and probably saved jobs, including mine. I hope you know that what you did mattered. Sincerely, a grateful coward." Ethan read the email 3 times, feeling emotions he couldn't quite name. Somewhere in this building was a person who'd carried guilt for 3 years, who'd suspected fraud and done nothing, who was now projecting their own redemption onto Ethan's actions. He didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. Just closed the email and sat quietly, thinking about courage and cowardice and all the shades of gray between them. His phone buzzed. Sophie's school calling to inform him that she'd fallen on the playground and scraped her knee. Nothing serious, but could he bring a change of pants because hers had gotten torn? The mundane emergency pulled Ethan back to reality. He told Marcus he'd be back in an hour, drove to the apartment to grab Sophie's spare clothes, and headed to the school. His daughter was waiting in the nurse's office, tear-streaked but brave, showing off her bandaged knee like a badge of honor. "Does it hurt bad, Munchkin?" "It hurt a lot when it happened, but now it just stings." Sophie looked up at him with those 2 perceptive eyes. "The nurse said I was very brave because I didn't cry much." "You're the bravest person I know," Ethan said, and meant it. He helped her change into clean pants, kissed her forehead, and walked her back to her classroom. "Mrs." Martinez thanked him for coming so quickly, and Sophie waved goodbye before rejoining her friends, the playground incident already becoming a story to tell. Driving back to the office, Ethan thought about how easily normal life reasserted itself, how a scraped knee could matter more than corporate intrigue or board meetings or any of the chaos that had consumed his week. Sophie's world remained small and manageable, built on playground rules and spelling tests, and the certainty that her father would always come when she needed him. That was the world Ethan needed to protect, not through grand gestures or risky schemes, but through showing up day after day, making good choices, building the kind of life that gave his daughter security and hope. The promotion, the recognition, the opportunities unfolding before him, they were all tools to serve that larger purpose. By the time Ethan returned to Meridian Tower, he'd made his decision. He would accept the director position. would use his new authority to build systems that prevented future fraud, would prove that Claire's faith in him hadn't been misplaced, and he would live with the secrets, the half-truths, the actions taken in darkness that had brought him into the light, because sometimes that's what courage looked like. Not perfect virtue, but complicated choices made with imperfect information in service of something larger than yourself. Ethan Cole had learned that lesson in a hotel corridor and a darkened office and a diner booth at midnight. Now he would spend the rest of his career trying to honor it. 3 weeks passed before Ethan truly understood that the storm had ended and he'd survived it intact. The transition into his new role happened gradually, deliberately, as if the company wanted to ensure that his ascent appeared organic rather than sudden. He spent his days training his replacement, attending meetings about security protocols, and slowly stepping into the responsibilities of a director-level position. The work was challenging in ways he'd never experienced, requiring strategic thinking rather than technical troubleshooting, but Ethan found himself rising to meet it. Richard Hernandez accepted a plea deal on a Friday afternoon, the news arriving via company-wide email that was carefully worded to celebrate justice while avoiding anything that might complicate the ongoing legal proceedings. Ethan read it alone in his new office, a space that still felt too large and too formal and felt nothing except a quiet sense of closure. The man who'd tried to destroy them both would serve 4 years in federal prison and pay restitution. It wasn't enough, not really, but it was something. And sometimes something was all you could reasonably expect from an imperfect world. That evening, Ethan picked up Sophie from her after-school art class and drove to the new apartment they'd moved into the previous week. It was in the same neighborhood, just 4 blocks from their old building, but the difference felt monumental. Sophie had her own bedroom painted the pale purple she'd chosen herself, with actual furniture instead of hand-me-downs and enough space for all her books and toys and treasures. Ethan had a separate bedroom too, no more pull-out couch, no more sleeping in the living room. The kitchen was big enough to actually cook in, and the windows let in real sunlight that made the whole space feel alive. "Daddy, can Emma come over tomorrow to see my new room?" Sophie asked as they climbed the stairs to the second floor, her art project clutched carefully in both hands. "Of course, Munchkin. We can have her over for lunch if her parents say it's okay." Sophie beamed, already planning what she'd show her friend. The enthusiasm was infectious, reminding Ethan why he'd taken the risks he'd taken, why he'd walked into that hotel room and chosen to help Clara despite knowing it could cost him everything. This moment, this security, this chance to give his daughter a childhood unmarred by constant financial anxiety, this was what it had all been for. Inside the apartment, Ethan started dinner while Sophie spread her homework across the kitchen table. It was a simple meal, nothing fancy, but cooking in a real kitchen with proper counter space felt luxurious after years of making do with a glorified hot plate. They ate together, Sophie chattering about her day and the art project she was working on, and how Mrs. Martinez had said her handwriting was improving. Normal. Beautifully, blessedly normal. After dinner, after homework and bath time and the usual negotiations about bedtime, Ethan tucked Sophie into her own bed in her own room and read her the next chapter of the book they were working through together. She fell asleep before he finished, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood dreams. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep, feeling the weight of responsibility and love and fierce protectiveness that defined his entire existence. Everything he'd done, every choice he'd made, it all traced back to this. To being the kind of father Sophie deserved, to building a life that gave her options and opportunities and the security to become whoever she wanted to be. His phone buzzed as he was washing dishes. A text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Chen. Hope I'm not disturbing your evening. Wanted to let you know that the board finalized the company's new ethics and compliance framework today. Your input was invaluable. Thank you for your dedication to getting this right. Enjoy your weekend." Ethan smiled, setting the phone aside. The ethics framework had been his first major project as Director of IT Security and Compliance, a comprehensive overhaul of the systems and protocols designed to prevent fraud. It had taken 3 weeks of intense work, countless meetings, and more late nights than he cared to count. But it was done now, approved and ready for implementation. He'd built something that mattered, something that would protect the company and its employees from people like Richard Hernandez. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd achieved this through methods that violated the very principles he was now charged with upholding, but Ethan had made peace with that contradiction. Perfection was a myth. What mattered was moving forward with integrity from this point on. Saturday morning brought sunshine and Sophie's excited request to visit the park before Emma arrived for lunch. They spent 2 hours at the playground, Sophie racing between the swings and the jungle gym with boundless energy, while Ethan sat on a bench and watched, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly just existing in the moment. Marcus texted asking if Ethan wanted to grab a beer next week, catch up properly now that the chaos had settled. Ethan replied with a yes, grateful for the normalcy of friendship uncomplicated by corporate intrigue. When Emma arrived at noon with her mother, Sophie dragged her friend immediately to her bedroom to show off every detail of the new space. Emma's mother, a woman named Jennifer, whom Ethan had met briefly at school events, lingered in the doorway. "This is a really nice place," she said. "Sophie told Emma you got a big promotion at work. Congratulations." "Thank you. It's been a bit overwhelming, but good overwhelming." "I'm happy for you both. Sophie's such a sweet kid. She talks about you all the time, how you read together every night, and how you always keep your promises." Jennifer smiled. "She's lucky to have you." The words settled warm in Ethan's chest, affirmation that despite everything, the divorce, the financial struggles, the compromises he'd made along the way, he was doing something right where it mattered most. After Jennifer left, Ethan made lunch for the girls, listened to them giggle over their shared secrets, and felt something close to contentment. This was the life he'd been working toward, not dramatic or extraordinary, just stable and secure and filled with small joys. When Emma's mother returned to pick her up that evening, Sophie was exhausted but happy, already planning the next playdate. Ethan ordered pizza for dinner and they ate it straight from the box while watching a movie Sophie had chosen, an animated film about friendship and courage that hit surprisingly close to themes Ethan had been living. Sunday passed in quiet domesticity, laundry and grocery shopping, and helping Sophie with a school project about community helpers. She chose to do her presentation on IT professionals, which made Ethan laugh and also feel touched that his daughter saw his work as important enough to share with her class. Monday morning arrived with the rhythm of routine reestablished. Ethan dropped Sophie at school, drove to Meridian Tower, and took the elevator to his office on the 17th floor. The space still felt too formal, too important for someone who'd spent 3 years in a cubicle, but he was gradually making it his own. Photos of Sophie on the desk, a plant that Mrs. Patterson had given him as a housewarming gift, books about cybersecurity and compliance stacked on the credenza. His calendar showed back-to-back meetings for most of the day, the kind of schedule that would have intimidated him a month ago, but now felt manageable. He'd learned to navigate executive politics, to read rooms and people, to balance technical expertise with strategic thinking. The morning passed quickly. Budget reviews and security audits and a presentation to the leadership team about the new compliance framework. Ethan handled it all with growing confidence, aware that he was being watched and evaluated, but no longer paralyzed by that scrutiny. At lunch, he ate at his desk while reviewing reports, the solitude a welcome break from constant meetings. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Ethan. This is Clara. I know we agreed to keep our distance, but I wanted to reach out one last time. I'm leaving Meridian Solutions. Accepted a CEO position at another company. My last day is Friday. I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye properly. If you have time this week, I'd appreciate the chance to talk. No pressure. I understand if you'd rather not." Ethan stared at the message, surprised by how much the news affected him. Clara was leaving, the woman who'd pulled him into the biggest crisis of his life, who'd trusted him with secrets that could destroy them both, who'd recognized something in him that he'd barely recognized in himself. She was walking away from the company they'd fought to protect. He sat with the decision for several minutes, weighing the risks against the human need for closure. Finally, he typed a response. "Congratulations on the new position. You've earned it. Coffee. Thursday afternoon, there's a place 2 blocks from the office that's usually quiet." Her reply came quickly. "Thursday at 3 p.m. Thank you, Ethan." The rest of the week crawled by with anticipatory tension. Ethan went through the motions of his job, attended meetings, made decisions, and tried not to think too hard about what he'd say to Clara when they finally sat across from each other without the weight of immediate crisis hanging between them. Thursday arrived gray and cold, early autumn asserting itself after an unusually warm September. Ethan left the office at 2:50 p.m., walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop he'd suggested, and found a corner table far from the windows. Clara arrived exactly at 3 p.m., dressed in casual clothes that made her look younger and somehow more human than her usual executive armor. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Ethan admitted, "but I figured we both deserved a real goodbye, one that wasn't scripted or watched." Clara ordered coffee from the passing server, then turned her attention back to Ethan. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence filled with everything that had happened and everything that could never be said aloud. "CEO," Ethan finally said. "That's a big step." "It's terrifying, honestly. Smaller company, tech startup, completely different challenges than Meridian." Clara's smile was wry. "But after everything that happened here, I needed a fresh start. Somewhere I could build something new without constantly looking over my shoulder." "I understand that." "Do you?" "Because you're staying, taking on more responsibility, building a career here." Clara's gaze was searching. "Does it bother you? Working at the company where all of this happened?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But I also feel like I owe it to the people here to make sure Richard's scheme was the last of its kind, to use what I learned to protect them." He paused. "And honestly, running away would feel like admitting we did something wrong." "We didn't. We exposed a thief and saved the company. The methods were questionable, but the outcome was right." "I'm glad you see it that way. I've struggled with that myself." Clara's coffee arrived, and she wrapped her hands around the cup without drinking. "I wanted to tell you something, Ethan. Something I should have said weeks ago but couldn't while we were still maintaining our professional distance." "What's that?" "You saved me. Not just my career or my reputation, but something more fundamental. I'd spent so many years operating in a world where everything was transactional, where trust was a liability and vulnerability was weakness. And then I met you, and you chose to help me for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. You restored my faith in the idea that good people still exist, that integrity isn't just a word we use in mission statements." The honesty in her voice stripped away the careful barriers they'd maintained. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared experience and mutual respect that transcended the corporate hierarchies that had defined their relationship. "You gave me a chance to be the person I wanted to be," Ethan said quietly. "I'd spent 3 years being invisible, telling myself that staying small and safe was how you survived. You showed me that sometimes you have to take risks, that courage matters even when it's terrifying. We saved each other then." "Yeah, I think we did." Clara finally took a sip of her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something? Do you regret it? Any of it? The break-in? The lies? The compromises we made?" Ethan thought about Sophie's new bedroom, about the security that let him sleep at night without anxiety crushing his chest, about the opportunities opening up for his daughter because he'd taken a chance when it mattered most. "No," he said firmly. "I don't regret it. I'd do it again if I had to. Even knowing the risks, especially knowing the risks, because the alternative was standing by while a corrupt man destroyed people's lives. I couldn't live with that." Clara nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she'd needed to hear. "I worried that you might feel differently once the adrenaline faded, that you'd look back and see me as someone who manipulated you into doing something you'd regret. You gave me a choice. I made it with full knowledge of the consequences." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "Whatever guilt exists, it's mine to carry, and I'm okay with that weight." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the world move past the windows. Two people who'd shared something extraordinary and would soon return to being strangers who occasionally passed in hallways before even that connection dissolved. "What will you tell your daughter about all this?" Clara asked eventually. "When she's older and asks about this time in your life?" Ethan smiled. "I'll tell her that sometimes doing the right thing isn't simple or clean, that courage means acting even when you're scared, that integrity matters more than perfection." He paused. And I'll tell her about a woman who trusted me to help her when she had every reason not to, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. She's lucky to have you as a father. I'm lucky to have her. She's the reason I could be brave, because I needed to be someone she could be proud of. Clara's expression softened. She will be proud. When she's old enough to understand what you did, what you risked, she'll know that her father is someone who stands up for what's right. That's a powerful legacy. They finished their coffee, the conversation drifting to safer topics. Clara's plans for the new company, Ethan's ideas for the compliance framework, the mundane details of lives that would soon diverge completely. When they finally stood to leave, there was an awkward moment where neither knew quite how to say goodbye. Clara extended her hand. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. I mean that. Ethan shook her hand, feeling the firmness of her grip and the genuine warmth in her eyes. Good luck with the new position. I hope you build something amazing. Good luck to you too. I'll be watching your career with interest. They walked out together, stood on the sidewalk for a moment as the afternoon traffic rushed past, and then Clara turned and walked away. Ethan watched her go, feeling the finality of the moment settle into place. Whatever connection they'd forged in crisis was ending here, on a city sidewalk, with nothing dramatic or momentous to mark its passing. Just two people returning to their separate lives, carrying secrets that would bind them together even as distance pulled them apart. Ethan returned to the office, finished out his day, and drove home to Sophie with a sense of completion that had been missing. That evening, after dinner and homework, Sophie asked him to tell her a story instead of reading from a book. What kind of story? Ethan asked. A real one. About something brave you did. Ethan thought for a moment, then smiled. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a father who worked at a big company. One day, someone very important asked him for help with something difficult and scary. The father had to decide whether to help, knowing it might cost him his job and the security his family needed. What did he do? Sophie asked, eyes wide. He helped, because he realized that the kind of person he wanted to be, the kind of father he wanted you to have, was someone who did the right thing even when it was hard. Did everything work out okay? It did. Not perfectly, and not without cost, but well enough. The father learned that courage isn't about not being scared, it's about acting despite the fear. Sophie considered this seriously. I think that father sounds very brave. He was just trying to be worthy of his daughter's trust. Well, he succeeded. Sophie yawned, snuggling deeper into her blankets. Will you tell me more stories like that? Someday when you're older, I'll tell you all the stories. But for now, you just need to know that Daddy will always do his best to be someone you can be proud of. I'm already proud of you, Sophie said sleepily. You're the best daddy in the whole world. Ethan kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway watching her drift toward sleep. The story he'd told was a simplified version of the truth, sanitized for a 6-year-old audience, but the core remained accurate. He had chosen courage over comfort, integrity over safety, and somehow it had worked out. Not because the universe rewarded good behavior, but because he'd been willing to fight for what mattered, and had found an ally willing to fight alongside him. The following Friday, Meridian Solutions held a small farewell reception for Clara in one of the conference rooms. Ethan attended, standing toward the back with other mid-level employees while the executives gave speeches about Clara's contributions and leadership. She accepted their praise with grace, gave a brief speech about the opportunities ahead, and thanked the team for their support over the years. Her eyes found Ethan's across the crowded room for just a moment. No words, no gestures, just acknowledgement of shared understanding. Then she looked away, and the moment passed. Ethan left before the reception ended, slipping out while people were still eating cake and talking about Clara's departure. He had no need for prolonged goodbyes or false intimacy. They'd said what needed to be said over coffee. Everything else was just performance. Life continued its forward momentum. October arrived with falling leaves and cooler temperatures. Ethan settled fully into his director role, hiring a small team and implementing the compliance framework he'd spent weeks developing. The work was satisfying in ways he'd never experienced, combining his technical expertise with a larger sense of purpose. He started dating someone he'd met at Sophie's school, A teacher named Rebecca who made him laugh and didn't push when he was reluctant to talk about his past. It was casual, nothing serious yet, but it felt like a step toward building a life that included more than just work and parenting. Sophie thrived in their new apartment, her confidence growing alongside her sense of security. She joined the school's art club, made new friends, and continued to amaze Ethan with her perceptiveness and kindness. Watching her flourish made every risk he'd taken feel worthwhile. The federal case against Richard Hernandez concluded without trial, the plea deal holding. Ethan read the final settlement in the news and felt nothing except mild satisfaction that the chapter was truly closed. The stolen money was being recovered, Richard was beginning his prison sentence, and Meridian Solutions was implementing reforms that would make future fraud significantly harder. Justice. Imperfect, but real. In November, Ethan received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a simple note in handwriting he recognized as Clara's. Congratulations on 6 months in your new role. I hear you're doing excellent work. Keep being the person you are. The world needs more people like you. Also, I wanted you to know that I've thought a lot about what we discussed over coffee. You were right. No regrets. What we did mattered, and I'm grateful to have had you as a partner when it counted most. I won't contact you again. But I'll always remember the man who walked into a hotel room, because it was the right thing to do, even though it was terrifying. Take care of yourself and Sophie. C. Ethan read the note 3 times, then carefully tucked it into the back of his desk drawer, a memento of a time when he'd discovered reserves of courage he hadn't known he possessed. He would never frame it or show it to anyone. But he'd keep it, a private reminder of the week that had changed everything. December brought the holidays and Sophie's 7th birthday. Ethan threw her a party at their apartment, inviting her school friends and their parents, and watched his daughter glow with happiness, surrounded by people who cared about her. Rebecca came too, helping with the cake and charming Sophie with a gift of art supplies that earned Ethan a grateful hug. Standing in his living room, watching Sophie blow out candles while her friends sang, and his small community of neighbors and colleagues celebrated with them, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the material improvements in their lives, though those mattered, but for the knowledge that he'd faced an impossible choice and made the decision he could live with. He'd risked everything to help someone who needed it, and in doing so, had discovered who he truly was beneath the layers of survival and pragmatism he'd built up over the years. Later that night, after the guests had left and Sophie was asleep with her new gifts scattered around her room, Ethan stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Clara was building her new company, pursuing her own fresh start. Richard was in a federal prison, paying for his crimes. And countless people at Meridian Solutions were working jobs that were more secure because 2 people had been willing to cross lines in pursuit of justice. The story could have ended differently. Should have, perhaps, given all the ways it could have gone wrong. But it hadn't. They'd walked through fire and emerged changed but intact, carrying secrets that would never be told but whose consequences would ripple forward for years. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, asking if Sophie had enjoyed her party. He replied with enthusiasm and a photo of his daughter surrounded by cake and presents, feeling the warmth of connection and the possibility of future happiness. The past would always be there, a foundation of choices made under pressure and compromises accepted in service of larger truths. But the past didn't have to define him. What mattered now was building forward with integrity, being present for his daughter, and using his position to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. In the end, that's what courage looked like. Not one grand gesture, but 1,000 small choices to do right instead of easy, to stand up instead of stay silent, to risk comfort in pursuit of something better. Ethan Cole had learned that lesson in a hotel corridor from a woman who'd trusted him when she had no reason to. He'd proven worthy of that trust, and in doing so had become worthy of his own. The storm had passed, the damage had been repaired, and in its wake, 2 lives had been fundamentally altered for the better. Some stories ended with dramatic flourishes and satisfying resolutions where every question was answered and every thread tied neatly. This one ended quietly, in an apartment where a father tucked his daughter into bed and promised her tomorrow would be even better than today. And for the first time in years, Ethan believed his own promise. Because he'd learned that sometimes the right thing actually did triumph. that courage could be rewarded, and that integrity wasn't just a word people used to make themselves feel better. It was a choice, a daily, difficult, essential choice. And Ethan Cole had learned he was capable of making it, even when everything was on the line. Especially when everything was on the line. That was enough. That would always be enough. On a cold night in December, in a modest apartment in a city that never stopped moving, Ethan Cole fell asleep with a clear conscience and woke to a future he'd built through courage and conviction. The man in the mirror wasn't perfect. He'd lied, broken rules, crossed ethical lines that couldn't be uncrossed. But he was honest where it counted, brave when it mattered, and devoted to being the father his daughter deserved. In the end, that was the only story that truly mattered. The rest was just context, complications, and the messy reality of trying to do good in an imperfect world. And Ethan Cole had done good. Not perfectly, but genuinely. That was his truth, his victory, his peace. And it would carry him forward, one day at a time, for the rest of his life.